Hello, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got this extended compilation for you today, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you're listening alone, good. If you've got headphones on, of course, that's even better. So relax and enjoy this long-form storytelling. Comment and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.
Serious. What is your paranormal, extraordinary, unexplainable experience? After my grandmother died, I begged for a sign that she was okay. Now a little backstory. My dad was orphaned very young and his aunt raised him. This is the grandmother I'm talking about. She was very religious, but also loved to say, "Don't make me curse on a Sunday, damn it." My father became a minister and she was so proud. So after she died, I was devastated. I was 15, so I was already a depressed teenager. So this one Sunday, I was serving as acolyte, kind of like an altar server, but the Protestant equivalent, and sitting by the altar with my dad. Offering time rolls around, so the organist is playing while the usher collects. At this time, I hear a woman singing. Now no one is singing. Most everyone is rummaging in their purses and wallets or looking bored or nodding off. The singing is now above me, a very high soprano, and then, I kid you not, a male voice jones in. I now think I'm losing it. I look to my left at my dad, and he's silently crying. I whisper, "Do you hear that?" He nodded and then got himself together. After the service on the drive home, he told me that the offertory song was "To God Be the Glory," and my grandma used to sing it as a duet with her husband, who I never met. I swear to you, those voices were my grandparents, and they are together again. I stayed at a friend's house in 8th grade. His mother had passed away the grade before from cancer, and the whole family was still adjusting. There was this little couch in the loft that I ended up crashing on. The TV was on, and it gave off enough light for me to see my surroundings. One friend was sleeping on the floor about 10 feet away from me. The friend whose house it was sleeping on a couch adjacent to me about 6 feet away. After being asleep for a couple of hours or so, I wake up to someone touching me. It wasn't violent or anything at all. It felt like when your mother would come into your room and you're asleep, and she pats your head and says goodnight. I woke up really quick and shot up and looked around. Nobody had moved, and my friends were fast asleep. I woke up my friend and explained what happened. He said in the most relaxed, sleepy voice ever, "It's just my mom, man, it's okay. She likes you." And that was her favorite couch. It felt oddly peaceful. I later found out that little couch was one of the only things she brought to the US when she came from Germany. I haven't spoken to that friend in years. That whole friend group ended up turning to hard drugs and crime. We were all troubled teens after all. I hope wherever he is that he is okay. I was 16, I think, and was showering while I slipped because of how slippery the floor got. I should have hit the back of my head on a tub faucet, but somehow I stopped falling. Only the back of my heels were touching the floor, so there was no way I stopped myself. I then felt a push that made me stand upright. I seriously have no explanation how that happened. All I know is that whatever happened might have saved my life that day. I went to go on a retreat with my class. Unfortunately, this is a required event. Anyways, the building we stayed 2 nights in existed since the early 1900s, which is being used as a house for priests. The priest warned the whole class on its first orientation to expect paranormal shit, which is supposedly normal because 2 or 3 priests have already died in the same building. The first night was scary as shit. Random banging, random name calling, and gut feeling that you know you're not alone. Second night was hell for me. I woke up to the sudden feeling that my blanket is being pulled slowly. By the time I opened my eyes, it was really being pulled by something. Terrifying. I get terrified when I think of it. I was staying the night at a friend's house and slept on the couch in the living room. I woke up in the middle of the night to see 2 women sitting on the edge of the couch next to me wearing early 1900s dresses. The older one was holding a shotgun pointed at the younger one, and both were looking directly at me. Super creepy. Have had a couple over the years. One of my favorites has to be the time I was sitting in my parents' bedroom playing my PlayStation I had set up on their bedroom TV. The French doors a few feet to my right had semi-transparent coverings over the glass. Mom went out and left me with my grandfather, who was downstairs watching TV. Asked me to make sure he didn't sneak off to nap in the bedroom across the hall from me. Caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye of what I thought was him sneaking into the room. I even paused my game and turned to watch him walk into his room. Got up, called to him and got no answer. Went across the hall to his room and it was empty. Went to the top of the stairs and called down to him. He responded and had been sitting watching his show the whole time. No one else was home. It was my senior year of high school, and I was on the school paper. A friend and I went on our town's haunted places tour so we could write an article about it. At one point, we stopped in a cemetery so that the lady could talk about the ghost that haunted it. When she was done, my friend and I were chatting as we walked back to the bus, and we all heard this loud, unearthly scream coming from behind us. And when I checked my phone recording, it had picked it up. I don't know what disturbs me more, that could have been a ghost, or that we may have heard something horrible occur but didn't have enough information to call the police. Either way, never got an explanation. One of my uncles, my dad's older brother, died of lung cancer. After an emotional funeral, the whole family met in a restaurant that he liked very much. One of my aunts, her sister, always said that our family almost always gets together at funerals or for family problems. Sadly, she's right. The point is that we were eating very well, and one of his sons, the eldest, jokingly says that he would like his father to give a sign that he was in a better place. We toast to that. Literally a second later, we heard a bang from the bathrooms. We all stopped to see what happened. We thought they had tripped or someone or something like that. When we arrived, we saw that 3 glass vases had broken on a ledge. The strange thing is that no glass fell to the ground. Everything stayed up, and they all exploded at the same time. Above, there was a painting of Elvis and Marilyn Monroe. Then we laugh. We feel like that was the signal. Why do I say that? He loved Elvis. He had complete discography, and in his youth, he even imitated his style of dressing and combing his hair. His wife, who also died of the same causes a year earlier, was nicknamed Marilyn because she was the blonde. With that, we felt that he wanted to tell us that he was with his wife and that they were fine. We even felt the energy of that place was calm and welcoming. We all feel happy. I'm sorry if it was wholesome instead of scary. My granddad chose his funeral song from Beyond the Grave. Obligatory, I wasn't there, and this is a second-hand story from my nan, but a lot of the family on my dad's side were all gathered in my nan's living room choosing songs for his funeral. Somebody suggests a song, and the suggestion was followed by an almighty clamor from the attic where nobody was. So my nan jokes, obviously not that one then, or something along those lines. Somebody suggests a second song. Again, there's a crash from the attic, and again, that song isn't chosen. I think the third song suggestion was met with silence, and that was the song they played at his funeral. If I remember rightly, they investigated the noise after and found a pram had been thrown from one side of the loft to the other. Definitely no other normal explanation. There was a time where I lived in a very small town with my mom's side of the family. I was staying with one of my aunts and my grandmother in this large one-floor house. In towns like the one I was, it was very common to build your bathrooms at the very back of the house. So as you can imagine, I woke up in the early hours of the morning to take a piss. There I was, turning on all the lights in the house until I reached the bathroom. I got in, I was sitting on the toilet when I suddenly began to hear a faint sigh or cry outside of the house. Like when you're crying but you want to speak and it comes out like this gasp wail? Yeah, I heard that. The first time I didn't get the hang of it since whatever it seemed to wail or sigh for a moment and then I'd hear silence. The second time I heard it, I began to register. A woman wailing or sighing outside my house at 3 a.m. The third time was when it clicked. My heart dropped and I did my business and jumped the hell out of there. I ended up waking everyone inside the house, and when we all stayed in silence to see if we could hear the sound again, we heard nothing. The next morning, my aunt spilled the tea and told me that it was very common to hear things at night. They didn't know why, but you were in for a ride if you ever got up during the late hours. She even shared a similar experience, and the town had named the sound as La Llorona, a very common Mexican urban legend. P.S. I think I heard La Llorona that night. I've had a lot, but I expect they all have explanations I'm just not aware of. My daughter is hard to explain. She's empathic, it seems, or just tapped into something most people don't seem to be aware of. Maybe she's just super smart, I'm not really sure. As a little kid, it'd just be on display. Often it was creepy. I'm sure she picked up on that, and as it became more aware, she stopped acknowledging it and refused to talk about it for most part, which I get. Anyways, the thing is, she becomes hilarious as a result since over time, I've started to see the holes in it. The other day was wonderful. She was riding her bike on the sidewalk and a bird flew by. I watched her look up at the bird, then crash full speed into a car that was parked across the sidewalk. Once I made sure she was okay and no damage to the bike or car, I asked, "What the hell?" And she answered, "I guess I couldn't feel the car since it's not alive, so I forgot about it when I looked up at the birdie." Then the other day in the car, she was asking me about something and I sort of teased her, "Why don't you just read my mind?" And her tongue-in-cheek answer was, "'Cause puberty sucks, so that's hard now." Like, it's an open secret, but it's funny, and I still have no explanation. I live on a dairy farm in Scotland, and about a year ago my dad's boss passed away. We moved to a different part of Scotland about 8 months ago, but the 4 months we were at the farm after his death were the scariest months of my life. So about 1 month after his death, my dad starts finding random objects out of place, and none of us thought nothing of it. Then a week later, he sees a shadow walk past the dairy door. A couple of days later, the other worker on the farm, Roger, sees a shadow walk through the shed. So this happens 2 or 3 times before he tells my dad, and Dad tells him about his experiences. So my dad comes home that night and tells us all while we're having dinner. Nothing happens for a week until I see it walking through a shed at about 5:30 a.m. I help my dad on my weekends off school. Then it's not seen for about a month or so. Then my dad comes home saying he's been tapped on the back and for a week he refuses to work there by himself. Then one morning I was walking down the parlor and I was tapped on my left shoulder. I'm shaking just saying this. Then, about 30 minutes later, I'm pushed into my dad. Then we moved, and I've never experienced anything like it, and hopefully never experience anything like it again. So I was lying in bed listening to music, just vibing. Yeah, fuck vibing. All of a sudden I hear this fucking loud scream followed by a beep, like you get sometimes when it's too quiet. It didn't come from the radio, nor from the streets. It came from outside of my fucking bedroom. So scared as I was pissed the bed, I was 14, but still, it for real gave me trauma, and grabbed a pocket knife I always keep under my bed, grew balls, ran out yelling, "Fuck!" and ended up tripping and falling face first into the group. I broke my nose and a piece of my jaw got IDK the word, but something happened with it. Ended up being a scream yelled by a woman a couple of streets further down. I can't explain the beep though. Multiple people heard the scream, police got called, homes were searched, but they found absolutely nothing. On CCTV footage, nobody was seen either. Fuck you, dark spaces. A little over a month after my grandma passed, I had the most vivid dream of her. I'm talking vivid as in I could feel her and smell her. I never remember dreams, but I remember this one a decade later. It even took me a while when I woke up to remember she was actually gone. The dream was just of me sitting and talking to her, asking her where she was, and she told me she was okay and not to worry about her, and then we hugged. I woke up and I never dreamt of her again. I never got to say goodbye to her before she passed, so I truly believe that was her giving us that goodbye. A weird experience I had recently isn't as personal as that, and honestly I feel a bit stupid writing this. I can already imagine people rolling their eyes. Several months ago, a celebrity I really loved passed, and I was absolutely devastated. Exactly 40 days after, I was scrolling through pics and admiring how cool they were and how cool their car was. They love that damn car, a black G-Wagon. I never see Jeeps, let alone G-Wagons, where I live in a small European town. An hour later, I'm walking through old cobblestone village streets, look up, and parked in an empty street where I'd never seen a single car parked is a black G-Wagon just like theirs, accessories and everything. Very weird but comforting. Like, feel free to make fun of me for thinking the ghost of a celeb sending me signs. I know, I would. But I just find that too much of a coincidence to just be a coincidence. I also noticed that there's a pattern of around 40 days after death, which is coincidentally quite a common belief across cultures. Not that bad, but it freaked me out. I was in the 5th grade, so I was 10 to 11 when this happened, but I was staying over at a friend's house for her birthday. There were 4 of us, including me, and the one friend whose house we were staying at would always say how her house is haunted. We never believed her, always thought it was a joke. Anyways, my friend and I went into her closet, which doesn't have a lock on it, mind you, and the light switch is on the outside. We went in there for God knows what, but the door was already almost closed, but it slammed closed and the lights turned off. Our other friends were in the living room watching America's Funniest Home Videos. We could hear them laughing from the closet, and we thought they were pulling some prank on us because I could see a shadow from under the door as if someone was standing there. So we called out for them and tried to open the door, but it was locked. There's no lock on the door. And I started yelling for them, but I could still hear them laughing from the other room. I became hysterical at that point because I'm really claustrophobic, and my other friend is pounding on the door. All I could feel was this insane sense of dread while I was in the closet. Eventually, my other friends heard us and came running to the closet and opened it. I yelled at them and asked what the hell that was for. They were confused. They asked what I was talking about. I explained to them what just happened, and the birthday friend got really wide-eyed and said that we need to get out of her room and close the door. The other one that was with her said that she swore they never left the living room and was actually wondering where we went. We spent the rest of the night in the living room and stayed up until dawn. I haven't been in her room since. That was 8 years ago. There was one time when I was 7 and it was probably 10 p.m. and I was in my bed and woke up to someone walking in the hallway. So my room that I used to share with my brother is a master bedroom, and my bed was on the left side of the room and had a view of who went in and out of the bathroom. So when I turned and looked at the doorway, I saw a black shadow figure that came out of the bathroom. You can see the outline of it clearly because we had this really bright nightlight in one of the outlets next to the sink, and I got up to see if it was my mom. She wasn't there. When this figure left the bathroom, the only way it could have left was down the stairs or going into my sister's bedroom, which the door was closed to, but it just vanished. And if it was my mom, I would have heard her go down the stairs. None of my family members believe this story. What is the most paranormal thing that you've witnessed? When my grandfather, Papa, passed away 4 years ago, as he was laying in the hospital bed passing on, my mom, my uncle, and my nana were the only ones there, and they said that my papa kept saying, "The turkey, don't forget about the turkeys." We all thought it was just him passing on and saying nonsense since it was like a week from Thanksgiving. But then, at the wake, we went to the funeral home, and there was a flock of turkeys right outside the entrance. We were all super creeped out. Then later the next year, when the headstone we ordered was finally put up, we went to see it, and my nana said how she liked the plot because it was as if he was looking over the wildflowers in front of it. Then as we left the cemetery, there was one lone turkey in the wildflowers. I have 2 other paranormal stories, but this is the one that creeped out my family the most. In one of my childhood homes, we had a foosball table in the basement. We would go down there and go on the computer. I remember going back upstairs, going to turn the lights off, and witnessing 2 poles in the foosball table spinning uncontrollably. When I was a kid, probably about 8, I visited Kenilworth Castle with my family, and I remember very clearly seeing a man watching over from a piece of the ruined castle. He was wearing a navy robe with gold rope tie at the waist. He had ginger hair and looked very angry. I distinctly remember that. Now, me being a kid, I was a bit confused as to why he just stood there, especially because pieces of the castle are barred off due to the walkways having collapsed or are just as unsafe for the public to cross. So I turned to my mom, telling her about the man and asking what he was doing, but by the time she looked and I turned back, he had disappeared. It isn't my only paranormal experience, but it's the one that stuck with me. I was in grade school and a distant relative passed away. I was asked to make a slideshow with pictures of her that my grandma gave to me for her funeral. I was home alone playing on my computer rather than working on the slideshow. The USB thumb drive with the photos on it was in the living room table about 10 feet away from me at the computer desk. I get a text from my mom asking how the slideshow is going. I hesitated to reply and thought to myself, I should probably start working on it already. Next thing I know, the thumb drive hits my computer monitor, actually moving it slightly, and lands in my lap. I'm home all alone, all by myself and frozen in fear. Making that slideshow was very uncomfortable after that. I was probably 12, staying over at a buddy's house. His dad was a cop and very reclusive, so as much as I hung out at their house, I had only ever seen him a handful of times and never engaged him. We had a spot in the basement where we played Nintendo. To our left was the furnace workshop room. His dad usually stayed upstairs, but not in the living room, usually the parents' bedroom, I suppose. So when I saw him standing in the furnace room at the workbench, I'll never forget he was wearing a red flannel. I was shocked to see him look at me and grin slightly. My natural reaction was to look away, and a second or two later, when I curiously looked back at him, he was gone. I didn't think anything of it. Later on, upstairs, he asks his mom where his dad is. She says he's off at work. I said, no, he isn't. He was just downstairs at the workbench. Buddy and his mom fell silent. Mom asked me what he was wearing, and I replied, a red flannel. My buddy was petrified, the mom visibly shaken. It's not until years later that I realized I'd seen a ghost. Neither mom nor son ever elaborated on it. Shortly afterwards, we went into junior high, where I found new friends and kind of lost touch with the buddy. The end. Oh, I've got a story for you. I'm a truck driver, and sometimes I pick up loads from a lot of old, creepy AF places. I was in a super old building in a tiny little town in Virginia. While I'm waiting for my trailer to get loaded, I went inside to go use the bathroom. Now, this place is super old, built in the 1860s if I recall correctly. The bathroom door didn't have a working latch, so instead there was a hook and loop style latch to keep the door closed. The hook was pretty stiff to get into the loop and actually had to be forced into place. I've got my back to the door while doing my business, and there's one loud knock on the door, like someone had struck it with the bottom of their balled fist. I gave them the obligatory, "Yo, someone's in here." No interruptions after that, but as I finish up and turn to the sink, the door flies open. Not a damn soul in sight. The hook and loop are both still securely screwed into the respective places in the door and frame. Upon returning to the dock to my loaded trailer, I asked the guy operating the forklift if he had knocked on the door, to which he replies no. I asked if there was anyone else there. Again, he replies no. I shrug it off. That is until we climb into the truck to go back to the scrapyard to get my paperwork, and he says something along the lines of, "You handled that pretty well. There's a reason I'm the only one who comes here to load trucks." Turns out, my account was far from the first of people having strange experiences in that building. I was sitting in my room. I had two Xbox 360 controllers laying next to my Xbox 360, and there wasn't a chance of them falling since they were farther from the edge of my desk. I'm laying there, and I hear a bang. I get up and see one of the controllers on the floor. I get up and place it back on my desk. I look over a little while later, trying to grab the charger from my phone, and I see that controller fly off my desk. When I was about 11 years old, my mom and I went to visit some family friends about 3 hours north of where I live. They had a son about my age. One night around midnight, down in his basement, my buddy brings out a Ouija board, and I, never having played with one, agreed reluctantly. We began to ask it the usual questions. Who are you? How did you die? But then my buddy started to get into some really creepy stuff like, how are we going to die? And how old will we be when we die? Well, about 15 minutes into this, his mom hears this from upstairs and tells us to put that shit away and go to bed. So we hurriedly close it and box it up and get ready for bed. We decide we want a glass of water upstairs, so being as quiet as we could and without turning lights on as to not disturb his mom any further, we start climbing the stairs in the near pitch black. The stairs in the house are the kind that go up to a back door to landing, take a 90-degree turn, and then go up a few more steps to the kitchen. As I'm passing the back door, there's a sheer curtain over the window of it, and I can see the moonlight coming in. Suddenly, there's a hellish, blood-curdling scream and an intense pulse of orange light like a fire coming from just outside the back door. I jumped and ran to my mom, who was sleeping on the couch upstairs. I was so freaked out, I ended up sleeping with her that night. My buddy somehow had the guts to go back downstairs and sleep in his own room. The next morning, we brought it up to everyone, and his mom heard it too. But my mom didn't. My friend had the fantastic idea of asking the Ouija board if they were the cause of the scream. It responded yes. We asked why it did it, and it responded, because you didn't say goodbye last night. To this day, it gives me shivers down my spine to even think about it. Not my story, my father's. He swears up and down it happened, but I was not there to confirm it because this happened years before I was born. His older sister, my aunt, had some friends over for a sleepover. They were doing a seance for funsies. My dad, then a teenager, decided to fuck with them by opening and slamming doors and making noises. They eventually tried to call on the spirit of Beethoven. In an adjacent room, my father dramatically slammed on the keys of a piano. You know, one of those portable electronic ones? At that point, they realized they were being fucked with and went to the other room to confront him. They had a laugh, and he headed back out to the living room they had been in. One of the girls followed him. He said he saw a shadowy figure in the reclining chair. It looked at him, nodded, and vanished before his eyes. He was ready to chalk it up as seeing things when the girl behind him asked if he saw that too. Thinking on it, I've got two that are equally high on the WTF scale. One I can logically explain away, but is still fucking weird. I just really don't know if it was paranormal or not, even though I can explain it away. The other, I have no idea how it could have happened. It doesn't make any sense in any logical way. Logical one had a shitty childhood. I don't mean like I was the geek everyone picked on or anything like that. It was objectively shitty. I was raised in a cult and cut off from the world. Beatings, degradation, open wounds, and pain were a daily occurrence. Objectively shitty, as I said. On my 11th birthday, I blacked out during the daily beating. I've always assumed what I saw was an injury-induced hallucination, but it's weird as fuck. I remember being beaten until I was standing in a field of purple and gold grass about waist height. There was someone beckoning me to come to them. As I got closer to them, I realized they weren't human. They were shorter than people usually are, maybe a few inches or so taller than me, but they had a greenish-brown skin color and very weird hair that kind of looked like vines. When I got close enough for them to touch me, they placed a finger on top of my head and said something in a language I don't know. After that, I'm back in a bloody pile on the floor of the basement, and it's dark. It took almost an hour to crawl up to the kitchen and another 45 minutes to crawl up to bed. A friend I told about it after I escaped, the only other person who I've ever shared this with, thought it sounded like an atypical NDE rather than a hallucination, which is the only reason I think it could potentially be paranormal in the traditional sense. The one I can't explain. One of my closest friends was in his 80s when he died. I was in my early 20s when he passed. I didn't know he had died yet when this happened. I was preparing dinner after work, and I hear a light knock on my door. I open it, and he's standing there, which isn't out of the norm, as it was our usual to get together night for dinner. I let him in, and he sits on the bar stool by the counter where he always sits for dinner. We have a little back and forth like normal while I'm cooking. As I'm finishing up cooking, I look over at where he was, and he's gone. Just completely gone. Even the bar stool was tucked under the counter edge still. I check around my place and I can't find him anywhere. I think I'm going nuts, so I call his mobile. The paramedic picks it up. He had me listed as son in his phone as a partial joke, and after accusing them of stealing his phone, the paramedic explains who he is. Then he said, "I think you should come over to your dad's house. Something's happened." Obviously, I rush over there and I get the full story. He died sometime that afternoon near his front door, and the mailman had seen the body through the window and called 911. He'd been dead for hours by the time I saw him and talked with him. He appeared right about the time his mail usually got delivered. He disappeared about the time police broke the door down. Our dinners together were a highlight of his week, even in death, it seems. Nothing too weird. Friend and I were fishing in Alaska on a river, and there were a lot of people there. As the day wore on, people drifted away and went home until it reached the point it was only he and I there. We were, I'm guessing, 50 yards away from each other. I got a feeling like I was being watched. I skimmed the tree line and saw nothing. After fishing a bit, I moved close to my friend, and we were talking, and I noticed he was looking around over his shoulder, etc. Finally, he said, "I know this sounds silly, but for the last 20 minutes or so, I felt like we're being watched." Then he asked, "You want to go home?" We couldn't seem to get out of there fast enough. Looked over my shoulder the whole time we were heading back to the car. I had a dream about someone who went to high school with me. She was a very nice, well-liked person, and she died in a drunk driving accident. The driver killed her. She wasn't the drunk driver. I dreamt that she was still alive, and we caught up. I woke up that morning and had that feeling when you know someone is in the room with you, even if you can't see that person. I was totally alone in the house, though. I inherited an antique bedroom suite of my grandmother's when she passed away. The wardrobe came with a mirror which was taken off and wrapped when we moved it to my house. A couple days after the furniture was set up in our spare bedroom, I noticed someone had taken their finger and drawn an arrow on the mirror pointing up. I asked my husband why he did that. He said he hadn't, and no one else had been there. As we sat staring at the mirror, we also realized it was put back on upside down. We saw this from the etching design around the edges. I guess Grandma had just been trying to let us know. I was working in an old small cabin way up in the woods with two of my employees with me. We were the only people there, and all three of us heard a lady call out, "Hello? Hello?" from right next to us in the other room, searched everywhere and found nobody in the small cabin or outside. To me, the voice sounded like it was maybe 15 feet away. It sounded like a middle-aged woman alarmed that we were there. To this day, I have no idea what that was, but we all heard it, so... I was going to sit on my bed and looked out the window. It was nice outside, and I saw 3 lights. One was the light from my neighbor's house, and the other 2 were like when you see eyes in the dark and they're reflective. I looked away and didn't think much of it because I thought the eyes were just the light from the neighbors. But then it hit me a second later what I saw. Then I looked back and the eyes were gone. Also, a couple weeks later after that, I was sitting on the exact same place on my bed. I have a desk behind my bed, and on that day, I had a protein shake bottle on my desk. I heard a noise and looked back and saw my protein shake bottle was on the ground. It was in the middle of my desk before and was launched around 2 to 3 feet away from my desk. There also was no open windows that could have created wind to make it fall over. I've struggled with accepting what happened was real and have tried to chalk it up to some sort of hallucination, but it felt so real I could not convince myself otherwise. When I was about 4 years old, we would stay at my aunt's house. It was a big house. I liked it, all except for one bedroom, the one we stayed in. If someone was in there with me, it was fine, but not when I was by myself. Whenever I was by myself in there, something felt really wrong. Time felt like it slowed down. The room would be completely silent, no noise from the outside, as if disconnected from the rest of the world. If you tried to talk, no sound came out. I felt like 1,000 eyes were watching me. The room felt like it was alive, like there were multiple invisible presents suddenly around. The room felt like a sick predator, silently deciding what to do with me. I avoided being in that room by myself at all costs, but one day I had to go in alone to get my shoes. There are 3 paintings in that room that my uncle got from his travels. One is a nice-looking woman laying on what seems to be an unmade bed. One was a man sitting in a large old-style hammock-type thing hanging from the ceiling. As for the third one, I can't remember what it was. So, I go in, and at once everything I described in the second paragraph is happening. I was so scared I didn't even want my feet to be on the ground, so I jumped on the bed. Suddenly I feel a breeze. I look behind me, and the painting of the woman is no longer a painting per se. It's like an open entrance. I can step into her room. She seems nice, but her eyes look wild. She calls me to her, and I listen and step in and climb onto the bed. I don't feel the sinister essence of the bedroom in her room, so I feel a little better. She calls me closer and offers to breastfeed me, to which I refuse and told her I don't want to. She smiles and says, "Don't worry, she'll have her maid make me a bottle instead." I see movement behind her, and someone is indeed doing what she says. That's when the sinister feeling suddenly multiplies tenfold, and I began to panic. I feel like she is going to harm me. Her eyes begin to look more and more sinister and wicked. I quickly jumped off the bed and back into the room. I swear I never felt such a heavy, hateful energy in my life. I had a minor experience with the second painting that I won't go into, but I ran out of there so fast after that. I begged and cried to my parents that I didn't want to stay in the room until they got really frustrated with me and would let me fall asleep outside on the couch first before carrying me off to bed. A year after that, my aunt died of cancer. I heard a rumor that someone purposefully did her evil to get rid of her because they wanted her husband, my uncle. He was rich. There was also a slight paranormal event the night she died too. I've never went back to that house since then. When I was a kid, my grandma's friend found an antique dresser on the side of the road. She didn't tell us she got it this way until years later. We thought it was hers. Anyway, my mom put it in my room, and every single night until the day I moved 5 or so years later, there was a white, shadowy figure of a little girl sitting crisscrossed on top of the dresser. She didn't move, and because the dresser was so tall, the head was cut off and you could only see her shoulders and down. I thought it was the light coming from outside my window, and I went so far as to tape my curtains down to prove it wasn't coming from outside. She never moved. She was at the same spot every night. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me, or maybe they were too freaked out to be honest, because my mom had complained strange things had been happening around the house. When they passed away, when I was in middle school, she never reappeared. It's kind of like that idea that kids can see imaginary things or ghosts because they're innocent, but when my parents passed and I realized how shitty life could be, I couldn't see her anymore. Sailors of Reddit, what is something unexplainable that you've seen while out at sea? We were about 60 nautical miles out in the Gulf of Mexico on the USS Grapple assisting with Hurricane Katrina when we hit a small isolated thunderstorm. Lightning came within 50 feet of the ship and pounding sheets of rain drenched the weather decks. The storm only lasted about 10 minutes, then abruptly stopped. I walked outside and saw the entire ship was covered in dragonflies and butterflies, thousands and thousands of them, covering most of the ship. At the time, it seemed impossible as we were so far out to sea. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. Later, I found out they were probably migrating and were blown off path by the storm. It sure looked like a miracle at the time, though. 3 tours on a Navy supply ship. I have a few. One saw the ocean smooth as glass, looked like you could walk on it. I've seen this on lakes, but didn't know the ocean could do it. I was standing forward lookout in the middle of the night, and it looked like one star got brighter than all the rest for a few seconds, then faded out of sight. Not unexplained, but a sandstorm that's blown out to sea turns into a fine dust storm as all the heavier particles fall away. It feels like everything is covered in silk. Rogue wave. I was at the helm on somebody's private yacht in the Gulf when I looked ahead to see a giant wall of water headed straight for the boat. I knew we were done for, but I headed straight into it as protocol for any large wave, just not this large. That kept us from being swamped, but wouldn't be enough. As the boat was getting perpendicular, the sails should have lost their wind, but instead, some unseen force lifted the stern off the water, righting the boat as it skimmed right over the wave and kind of roughly landed on the other side. After that, I was some kind of local legend. I don't deserve any award, say what you want, but that yacht was pushed over the wave, not by me. The most mind-blowing thing I saw while in the Navy was thousands of sea snakes swimming across the Straits of Hormuz. They were all about a yard or meter apart as far as the eye could see in every direction. On a boat, doing some summer work for 2 weeks, we were 10 people on board, but a day before we go to land, I realized we were 11. I asked the captain, he says that we are 10. I do a head count all day and try to remember who's missing. I can still remember him, but also not. Same goes for the others. I spent about a year on a boat while in the military, and a few things come to mind. We were on a swim call for a shellback ceremony, where basically the boat stops in open water and you can jump off the boat into the water to celebrate crossing the equator. We're off the coast of Ecuador by give or take 40 nautical miles, and the crew solicits folks to have a water polo game in the water. About half of us are mid-game when a 15-foot hammerhead swims amongst our group. Everyone evacuates the water at record speed, and the guys on shark watch are in hot water, no pun intended. The other thing I think of is the green flash you see right when the sun goes down. Only happens on select clear late summer early fall evenings. I can't explain how an orange star makes green light flash across the water, but I'm sure there's a fairly reasonable explanation for that one. I was helping to deliver a sailboat from Delaware to Massachusetts, and we were about 40 miles east of Montauk, near the top of Long Island, doing 5 to 6 knots under a fairly gentle breeze. I was off watch reading or dozing in the sedge when I heard the woman who was helming the boat gasp an "Oh my God" in a tone of voice that suggested something truly unusual was going down. When I got up and scanned around the boat, there were shark fins surrounding the boat on all points on the compass, literally as far as the eye could see, densely packed too, thousands and thousands of them. The rest of the crew became instantly interested in continuously checking the bilge to make sure water wasn't coming in or air going out. It took us about 45 minutes at 5 to 6 knots to sail through them all into clear water, well over 4 nautical miles, easily the creepiest experience I've ever had at sea. I was out in a small boat in Port Valdez, Alaska, just west of Shoup Bay. Summertime, maybe July or August. Well, if you're not familiar, this area is up on the northern end of the Gulf of Alaska, an area of significantly high mountains. Anyhow, a thunderstorm rolls through, fast, like the ocean and mountains are going to have a rumble and it's going down right now. The wind jumps from breezy to fucking hold on in no time. Dark clouds gathering, and the light takes on that greenish, bruised color. The air comes alive, that kind of storm. A bolt of lightning struck the water in between our small boat and a larger ship about 1,000 yards away. It seemed like it hit 75 yards away from me, but there's no way it could have been that close, is there? No way. Well, tell that to the hair on the back of my neck, to my olfactory nerves, which were soaking in the spooky ozone haze which lay atop the water. We decided immediately to get the hell away from that particular spot as fast as possible. As we came up in speed pointing towards anything resembling shelter, I began to notice that the surface of the water was speckled, then spotted, then covered, then littered with fish carcasses. Salmon by the boatload were either dead or conked out and were floating in a 100-yard area like skim of flesh, bone, gristle, fins, and roe. Being surrounded by so many recently expired creatures reinforced the immediacy of getting the fuck out of there, so we stopped trying to dodge around them and just booked it, and be damned to the lower unit of the outboard. I lived, obviously. Also, I guess I know what happened since I just explained it, but I already wrote all this shit out, so hope you enjoy. The ocean be crazy. Back in April of 2012, I was working on a small cruise ship that was doing a 100th anniversary Titanic memorial voyage. We were 640 kilometers, 400 miles from the tip of Newfoundland, circling the sea with the wreck of the Titanic almost 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles beneath us. There was a pastor on board who led a memorial service and a band with authentic period instruments who played and completed the last song the musicians were playing as Titanic went under, in order to symbolically finish the performance and free the spirits or whatever. I was standing on the deck after all of this, just leaning on the railing while pondering life and noticing how there was a relatively calm sea for those waters at that time of year. Out of absolutely nowhere, a small bird flew from the darkness and landed right next to me. It was just a little sparrow or similar, not a gull or any type of seabird, and had no business being so far offshore. He wasn't scared of me and even let me pick him up. It was a very bizarre experience. Not a sailor, but my grandfather was. Once, when he was sailing to Antarctica for a surveying expedition, the maelstrom suddenly stopped and the moon came out illuminating a huge fish, perhaps 10 feet below the surface. At about 30 or 40 feet in length, it slowly followed my grandfather's boat until it suddenly disappeared. The rain and wind suddenly started again. When my grandfather reached the base, he heard a huge thing had attacked another ship, nearly sinking the boat and actually eating one of the crew before it was fought off. My family are commercial fishermen, and I used to work on the boats as a summer job. We caught a huge great white, maybe 2 to 3 miles offshore from the beach I normally go to. We let it go and it swam toward the beach. We'd also occasionally catch electric fish, and they would make this whole pile of fish on the deck jolt. Thank goodness for rubber boats. Someone on the same dock caught a World War II torpedo. Another boat that passed a similar path, less than a mile behind us, caught a tuna that was worth several $1,000s. When dolphins would flip and play off the bow waves, when you can see by starlight alone on a clear moonless night. I was in the fish hole below deck, getting a basket of fish passed down to me. My mouth must have been slightly open. A seagull shit directly down my throat. Squid juice will remove your fingerprints from your hands over time. Not a sailor, but my granddad was. He was taking supplies to Siberia on a merchant oil tanker, and I remember he told me that while he was in the Arctic Ocean, there was a terrible storm, and it made even the most hardcore sea dogs sick. Eventually, the storm subsided at about 4 a.m., and because of the midnight sun, it was relatively light around, so he ventured onto the deck and said he felt more sick than he ever did during the storm. On an iceberg in the distance, he describes a gargoyle-like creature with wings facing the direction of the mainland. He called out his midship steward, and they corroborated the sighting. However, when they went to the next person, the gargoyle thing was gone. He has loads of cool stories about all sorts, but that stuck out. Merchant mariner here. I was on the bridge watch on the USNS Alan Shepard close to midnight. We were in the middle of Pacific, probably a couple 100 miles east of Okinawa. It was a moonless night, and everything was pitch black. I was on lookout on the port bridge wing when a beam of light resembling a searchlight shined on us from directly above for a few seconds and then stopped. Immediately after, I saw what looked like a star at first dip down and shoot away from us faster than anything I've ever seen. No way in hell it was a shooting star. Now, the Chinese Navy is pretty active in the Pacific and harass people constantly, so it could have been a high-tech drone, but something tells me it was not from here. I was paralyzed with fear for minutes. Never been so freaked out in my life. We know too much now, so can always explain it, but I have seen shit that made me question reality. In some harbors, the tide can come from 2 directions. and you get white water in completely flat water. You can also get standing waves which look like they should be moving but don't. Probably the weirdest was when I was a kid, sailing back home at night after a week sailing across the coast of England with my grandparents. I was a city kid and generally finding this whole experience deeply uncivilized. It was pitch black with cloud cover, so no light from moon or stars. The dark sea ruminating under a still but ominous sky. We had our GPS and radio on, and we were well away from the shipping lane where skyscrapers on their side would pass through slowly but with an intimidating certainty. Slovenly, we sulk our way forward with static intimately buzzing from the handheld radio. The darkness was all-encompassing. You could see the twinkles of reality out ahead. We were probably an hour away from a warm bed. Then, suddenly this huge arse spotlight appeared on the surface of the sea, tracking crazily back and forth in an arch, then hovering in place and back again, lighting up the undulating black you were cutting through. The light pauses. It appears like it's looking for something, then suddenly it moves, freezes, then moves again, like a peak of a sin wave. Back and forth, hunting, searching, looking for something. Is it looking for you? Well, obviously this freaked me out and asked my granddad, who was helming, what was happening, and he replied, "Oh, that's just the lighthouse reflecting off the clouds." Not a sailor, but I've still got a story. My uncle owns a pretty large fishing boat, and during spring break he decided to take me to a deep part of the sea that he can bond with me, I guess. Me, being unexperienced with anything that has to do with water, was hesitant at first, but I eventually gave in. Because my uncle always tried to be as safe as possible, he wanted me to wear a hazmat suit, sort of. It looked like one, but not sure if it was. This particular suit was white, as to repel sunlight so I don't die of heat stroke. After about 2 hours at sea, I managed to catch a big fish. However, I had to somehow drag it on the ship. The fish, however, had other plans, and as I'm not strong at all, got dragged off the ship into the sea. I couldn't see anything, and because I was panicking, I was sinking lower and lower. I was almost giving up at one point, as if my brain had frozen trying to process what the hell was going on. At this point, time felt slower, and in my frenzy, I remembered that if I stayed calm, I could float back up. As I resurfaced, my uncle told me something I'd never forget. What you know about rolling down in the deep? When your brain goes numb, you can call that mental freeze. When these people talk too much, put that shit in slow motion, yeah. I feel like an astronaut in the ocean, eh? Me and my mateys were cruising along at about 50 knots, located 125 northeast of Port Elizabeth, roughly 20 nautical miles out, when a shipmate got swept overboard by a huge wave. I hobbled on my wooden leg down to the deck, only to see a dark green sea creature swallowed him whole. I dropped the pipe out of my mouth with a shock as I looked over the edge of the ship. My deckhand walked down on the plank where we usually sacrifice other pirates to the deep. He dived right in after him, but soon came up empty-handed. Damn near shit my pants. Redditors who have stumbled upon human remains, what's your story? I did a wellness check for my father-in-law. He wanted me to check on his best friend who lived near me. His friend was very dead. Ended up being a night of talking to EMS, police, and medical examiner. Police were nice and gave me a ride home, even cleaned out the back seat first. I'm from the Houston area. In the late 80s, me and my brother and some neighborhood friends all lived on the same street. At the end of the street, there was an old warehouse building we started to explore, looking for wood to build a bridge over the canal behind our houses. So my brother found a small stack of plywood. We started picking it up. On the final piece, one of our friends let out the biggest holy shit. It was a half-buried body wrapped in an old tarp. I still remember the look of exposed skull with some hair still attached. We all took off running and made it to a friend's house because he lived the closest. Needless to say, cops were called. We were told to never go over there again. I used to be on my condo board and also was the assistant superintendent. A few years back, actually the same week Robin Williams died, a guy came to the building wanting a wellness check for his buddy. They were in AA together. He knew his friend had been having serious life issues and was worried because he'd been out of touch for a few days. Basically, dude lost his job and Buddy was deeply concerned. Me and the main super tried to open his condo door and it was nearly jammed shut. Forced it open enough to get inside and poor guy had hung himself from the front door closer mechanism. My first reaction was total sadness. It wasn't a tall enough door for a conventional hanging. He'd have to crouch on the floor and resist the urge to stand. The idea that he had been in such total despair to make it work nearly killed me. I've had a few attempts in my past of my own, too easy to put myself in his shoes, and then I had to tell his friends what was going on. I worked as a meter reader for a few months. It was hard-ass work, mostly speed walking several miles a day, house to house year-round, climbing through bushes and over locked gates while dodging dogs. There was one house on my route set back a quite bit from the main road. It had a private road that was pretty overgrown leading up to it. Thankfully, this was a driving route, so I was in my work truck that day. It was a nice day, and I had the windows down. When I got close to the house, I started smelling something bad. When I pulled up, I noticed that there was quite a bit of mail piled up. Yard work was undone, and the smell was growing stronger the closer I got to the house. And when I got to the meter, I saw that it hadn't changed, so no electricity in a month. I kinda just knew what had happened. Called my supervisor and they said, "Not your business. Move on and finish your route." I used to be a paramedic and the mandatory reporter in me still exists, so I called the police for a well check. When they arrived, they found the homeowner in his bed. He had died a few weeks prior, and with no family, no one ever noticed he was gone. I got in trouble for not completing my route that day. Left the job a few weeks later. Asshats. When I was young, 8 or 9, I went with my grandmother to an old cemetery. She made gravestone rubbings as a hobby. I was off wandering around by myself when I saw and picked up a yellow stick, then noticed something was off. Then I saw more similar sticks. Then I see a skull, and then I realized what I was holding, a small arm bone. This cemetery had well over 100 plots dating back to the 1800s. Turns out, old wooden caskets can make for cozy homes for groundhogs, but the groundhogs prefer to evict the prior inhabitants before moving in. I'm almost 40, and still I'm not a fan of cemeteries, but of all the places to stumble on something like that, I guess a cemetery is the best case scenario. Not actually me, but my dad used to live in Sallins, County Kildare, Ireland. His house was a few meters from Grand Canal. He also had a housemate. I was visiting my dad, and his housemate asked if he wanted to go fishing because he would often go fishing on the canal with his friends. My dad said no, and the guy just said okay and went fishing. Half hour later, my dad's phone is ringing. He picks up and seconds later is putting his shoes on, telling me to stay in. I ask him what happened, and he told me that the housemate and friends found a human foot. I asked him if he was joking. He said that he hopes they were joking and left. I remember going shopping the next day, and the Garda police were still there. Turned out, someone killed a man. His name was Kenneth O'Brien, then dismembered him, put parts of his body in bags and suitcases, and people would find these parts in different parts of Ireland. When I got my first apartment, I lived in a pretty sketchy urban neighborhood on the top floor of a shitty Victorian. We used the roof like a deck. When I wasn't there, I left the window open so the dog could go out and get some fresh air. Well, she somehow escaped off the second story when I'd stepped out. I panicked and all of my friends in the area started looking for her and calling her. We called animal control and everything. Hours passed. We were sitting there when we heard this thump, drag on the stairway. Opened the door, and there she was, proud as punch, dragging a fucking pelvis up the stairs to our apartment. It was mostly bone, but there was still some flesh clinging to it. It was the kind of smell that made your eyes water and gorge rise in your mouth. We were trapped between horror and joy because she was back. We live near a famous forensics body farm, so I guess that's where she got it. It took weeks to get the smell off. So when I was in high school, me and my friends decided to go to the train trestle to party. This thing's pretty high up over the tree line, and we're tossing shit over it and watching it hit the ground, making quite a mess. So the next day I feel bad and head down to the woods to clean up a bit when I stumble along what looks like clothing laid out in a clump. Then the smell hit me and I almost vomited. I walked over. I'd never seen a body before, so I called my parents, told them where I was. They called the police. Next thing you know, a group of cops come sauntering into the woods. Turns out it was this girl that had gone missing a couple of months back. She just fell off the train trestle and no one could find her. Not my story, but my dad worked in mountain rescue for a few years, and once they got a call to say there was what looked like the remains of a tent at the bottom of this ravine. They got to it and saw that it was rolled up and the guide ropes were all wrapped around it. Turned out There was a man's body inside the tent. When they ID'd him, they realized he'd been reported missing a few weeks ago, and that this was perhaps some kind of elaborate suicide, as at the top of the ravine was a really high crag that would notoriously windy. They think he pitched his tent atop the crag and then waited to be blown into the ravine. Horrible way to die. When my dad was in high school, he went to the bathroom and noticed progressively larger pools of blood on the floor and decided to follow them. They led all the way to the parking lot and eventually to a truck where a school janitor was sitting inside, deceased. He had cut almost his entire forearm diagonally while fixing an air conditioning unit. Later, my dad found out it was one of his acquaintances' father who he had found. Really sad. About 6 years ago, I found my upstairs neighbor Dave dead. He had been rotting up there for at least 2 weeks. Here's the backstory. Dave had a drinking problem. He was a chill, perma-drunk, divorced older white guy, and he looked like he had given up on many things in life. I sometimes would go down to the liquor store, say on a Friday or a weekend, and I would invite Dave to come with me. One, because I didn't like when he would drive drunk to restock. He didn't work, or at least nothing steady. This was a low-income area apartment in Jersey. And two, because I enjoyed his company. I would hear Dave through my ceiling in my little apartment. He lived above me. Time went on, and I noticed his car was parked outside, yet no sign of Dave. My suspicion grew every day I returned home from work, because that's when I would usually run into Dave. I had knocked on his door a couple random times as well. Well, about 12 days go by, and I called up my apartment building front office and tell them I was worried about Dave. They said they would call the police department for a wellness checkup on an elderly resident. I was worried, so I asked the office to keep me informed on my neighbor, and I was friends with him. I had a cool property management lady. I waited outside for the police. 2 of them showed up, and I was still in my military uniform and had just gotten home. They knocked on the door and announced they were the police. There was no answer. They got the key from the front office and announced they were going to enter the apartment. Before they opened the door and went inside to check on Dave, they told me I could wait outside, but I wanted to see Dave, my friend. Well, as soon as they opened the door, the smell just hit you. It was literally the worst smell I've ever smelled in my entire life. Vodka rotten human corpse stench is how I could put it. Dave had suffered a heart attack at his computer one night of heavy drinking. He lived alone and didn't have many friends or family that would check in on him. I'm glad I had the decency to care about Dave, the neighborhood random drunk, because who knows how much longer he would have been up there, until maybe they evicted him. Needless to say, the apartment upstairs got renovated and wasn't offered for rent for a few months, but 6 months later, a couple moved in. I knew they were oblivious that Dave had died there. Worst thing about it was the female that moved in also managed to get a job at the front office, but they were under new management at that time. I moved once my lease was over. When I was 8 years old, I found the body of a missing woman several days after a huge flood in our area. Her body was mostly hidden under a kiddie pool down by the creek that ran through our family farm. She was holding her baby when she disappeared in the flood. They found the baby a little farther down the creek area on a neighboring farm. Found a dead guy when I was 10. He was homeless, and he had been under a bridge in high traffic area for some time, but I'm guessing no one gave him a second glance because he was homeless, so nobody noticed that he was dead. I thought he was a pile of trash at first. I'll never forget the feeling in the pit of my stomach when I realized that the trash was a person. I'd never seen a dead body before, let alone one that had been outside for days. I ran home so fast, told my mom, and she called the cops. I think about him all the time, not because he scared me back then, but because I don't know if anybody else thinks about him. I don't know if anyone misses him. He was just lying there like a pile of trash and nobody cared. God, that's so fucking sad. Edit. I just want to add that I've told this story before, and it's the first time I've gotten a positive response. Usually people say stuff like, "What if he was a junkie?" And it breaks my heart. Thanks for the gold, but please consider donating to a homeless shelter or an organization that helps the homeless instead. Every human being on this planet deserves to live and die with dignity. Urban exploring in an abandoned factory in Montreal. Me and my friend went there loads of times. Nothing ever happened. Last time, though, we went back after a couple of months from our last visit, and on the upper floor near the roof access, we got hit by a stench I'll never forget. We saw a tent in a corner, and yeah, there was the corpse of an old homeless man. The cops seemed to be more concerned with the fact that we were wandering in the building, though. Guess it happens quite often. There's finally a place where I can share this story. I was 11 when I visited my grandmother in Mexico, just along the California-Mexico border. This is important for later. She was showing early signs of dementia, so many of our family members would stop by and make sure she was okay. When I was there, I stayed for about 2 weeks. When I went to our deep freezer outside the house, that's just common for houses in Mexico, while searching for an ice pop, I reached out to the bottom of the freezer to find a bag. Out of stupid child curiosity, I opened the bag, expecting to find chicken or frozen peppers, but no, I found meat, with a small Mi Vida Mi Familia tattoo. I freaked out for months afterwards and never told anyone, totally believing my 75-plus-year-old grandmother committed murder. It wasn't until a couple of years ago I found out I had a great uncle who tried to cross the border. Remember when I said we lived in the California-Mexico border to get to his wife and kids, but sadly was caught and given time. Afterwards, he shot himself in his childhood bedroom. My grandmother, devastated, called the police and sent him away, but not before taking the hunk of human meat that held his tattoo. It was said during the funeral it was an open casket ceremony, and the people attending all noticed that his suit was inverted quite deep into one of his shoulders, but nobody questioned anything. This still keeps me up all night. I was working at a cement brick block yard when 2 kids on bikes came out from under a bridge over the train tracks screaming, "Dead body!" Myself and a coworker ran to investigate. We found a petrified body dressed in winter clothes inside a makeshift shelter made from our blocks. Poor guy must have been homeless, and from the looks of it, he must have been there for a couple of years after passing. We called the local authorities and I never heard back if they were able to identify the body. The weird part was he looked really well preserved. His hair and skin was still there, and you could almost see a facial expression. I was working security at a college and stopped in to use a bathroom at the sports complex. The bathroom stunk to high hell. It didn't smell like something dead, just like an awful gut-busting dump. I could see shoes under the door of the last stall and thought homie must have had a bad burrito or something. Fast forward a few hours and a lady approaches a coworker and I about her dad. He came out to walk around the athletic track every afternoon, but today he was several hours late coming home. I immediately thought of the bathroom from earlier, so I go back and I see the same shoes under the door of the same small and smell the same awful smell. I called out, "Sir, sir," a couple times and banged on the door and got no response. We always kept an off-duty cop on the grounds while students were there, so I called him over the radio to come check on this guy. Sure enough, the cop had to climb over the wall of the stall to get in and unlock the door because dude was dead. Died of a heart attack on the toilet in a public bathroom. What a shitty way to go. I've seen a few fatal car accidents, but there was one time that sticks out. My brother was taking an osteology course in university, and for an extra credit assignment, he was given the opportunity to find bones from animals and identify them. We went to a popular area in the desert around us, and we found all kinds of bones from snakes and lizards, some birds and other small creatures. While walking through, my brother picked up a bone that we couldn't identify, started flipping through pages of animals in the area and we couldn't find it. Goes to class the following week and turns in his assignment to his professor. His professor emails a few days later and says to call him ASAP. What he had found was part of a collarbone of human remains. We then had police come to our home with a detective to tell them where we found it. The conclusion was it was an illegal immigrant that had died crossing the border, probably from lack of food and water. Creepy to think we were just holding on to it and examining it for so long. What conversation or interaction with a physically normal stranger left you wondering if you just talked to something non-human or supernatural, like an angel, demon, ghost, alien, time traveler, etc.? I was working in Florida as a manager in a large chain of automotive dealers. I was on the service side and dealt with the customers who had the most difficult issues or were upset. One day, an older man came in and I went for a quick test drive to assess his concerns with the vehicle. He was calm and polite, a very easygoing person. After speaking for a few minutes, he asked me if I liked magic. He then proceeded to start talking about where I was from. He didn't ask a single question, he just began to talk. He narrowed down the area until he was within a 20-minute drive from the hospital I was born in. That hospital is an 18-hour drive from where that dealership was. After a few minutes, he said, "But you didn't live there very long. Moved south to the city of blank, right?" He was absolutely spot on. Then he started rubbing his eyes and kind of humming. He asked me how long I had lived in Norway, then narrowed it down to the city I lived in for 8 years. At this point, I'm thinking he's some kind of weirdo who has done a background check on me, but how would he know where I'd lived while overseas? He said, "Do you believe in magic now?" On the return drive to the dealership, I was running every possible scenario through my head. Did a friend set me up? How did he know the name of the city in Norway? When we arrived, he leaned over and said, "I'm just having some fun with you. I was in the CIA for years as a linguist. Now that I'm retired, I just use it as a party trick." He had me so confused. He honestly could have said he was some kind of psychic, and I wouldn't have been able to argue. One evening in winter, I didn't leave work till almost 7 p.m., so I was walking home and thought, fuck it, I'll cut through the park to get home quicker, even though it's really poorly lit. A couple of minutes into the park, I could hear a group of people behind me and in front of me, and was thinking, fuck, I'm gonna be jumped. Up ahead, there was a lamppost with a CCTV camera on it, so I thought I'll stop there, and at least I'll get jumped on camera. As I stood beneath this light, this really tall woman jogged over and stopped next to me. I'm 6 feet tall, and she was way taller than me. She asked me, "Is it okay if I walk with you?" And I was like, sure, okay, I guess. She walked me to the edge of the park, talking about how dodgy the park was at night. As soon as we got to the edge of the park, she told me to have a good night, then jogged back into the park. It was a really weird experience. I felt certain I would have been mugged or something if she wasn't there. I walked through that park every day for about a year and never saw her again. There was a young woman about my age at the time, early 20s, sitting alone at a nearly empty coffee shop. She seemed like she was trying not to cry, so I went over and asked if I could sit with her. We talked for hours about everything and nothing at the same time. She didn't go into detail about what was going on with her, but she felt like there was no hope. I did my best to encourage her, told her not to give up, tried to give her reasons to hold on, thought of ideas that might have given her a spark of hope. The coffee shop was closing. I wrote my phone number down and told her that I would love to hang out with her again, and she could call me anytime. She looked at me and told me that everything I said to her wasn't for her to hear, it was for me. I hadn't told her that I was in fact suicidal. I had originally gone to the coffee shop to think about how to best kill myself. While talking to her, I figured if I could maybe help someone else not to feel the way I do, I wouldn't kill myself, at least not yet. She not only saved my life that day, but gave my whole life a new purpose filled with hope. I'm a therapist now. I help people all day. She hugged me, then walked out the door. I ran after her because she forgot the napkin with my number on it. I was no more than 2 seconds behind her. I go outside, and there was no one there. This story is hard to explain, but I still get shivers when I think about it. He was a customer I was helping out. Honestly, there was nothing that really stood out with him. He was handsome, but in a normal way. He dressed normal, talked normal, was blandly friendly, as you are with strangers. Just a normal upper middle class type guy. The only thing that really stood out was his blue eyes. Not in a goofy supernatural type way. He just had very, very blue eyes. But for some reason, he made every hair on my neck stand on end. Alarm bells were going off in my head like crazy. All I wanted to do was hide. I've never felt this way before or since. Even when I was followed home by someone, I've never felt such gut-deep "you are in danger" as I did with this guy. After ringing him through, he reached out to shake my hand. This is not common at all here, but out of politeness, I took it and shook. And I instantly got so nauseous I almost gagged. The moment I got nauseous, he just held my hand and smiled. And something in that smile made me absolutely sure he knew what I was feeling and he enjoyed it. I'm not religious in any way, but I remember thinking in that moment, oh fuck, is this the devil? After he left, I was still so sick feeling I had to go to the back and sit down. I'm not sure if he was a serial killer or what, but to this day, I have never experienced something even close to that encounter. I absolutely felt bone-deep certainty that I was in some sort of danger. I felt every bit the prey. It's a hard story to explain because it's all based on feelings, so I haven't told that many people about it, but to this day, it is absolutely one of the scariest and weirdest things I've ever experienced. Was in my 20s traveling through Italy. I was on a boat trip around Capri when an old guy started chatting with me. Whatever the question was, I made some remark about backpacking and wanting to make money stretch the length of my travels, and he responded that he would swap my age for all his money. Felt like the world had stopped, holding its breath while I thought about my answer. It truly felt ominous and foreboding until I said no. I still remember that feeling 30 years later. I live in a small town with very few black people around, Central Europe. I was pretty down because of a girl and went for a kebab. While I was standing in queue for a kebab in the pub right next to it, there was a woman that caught my attention because of two things. Initially, because of her race, that's just uncommon to see there. Another, the fact that I for sure never seen her before, despite living in this small town my entire life and going around this pub every day. Another thing I noticed was that she didn't order anything. She just sat there by the table alone. Then I ordered my food, and while waiting for it, the woman leaned over the fence that separates kebab place from the pub, looked directly at me, and offered me an ice cream. I accepted the offer, and immediately after that she looked me in the eyes, smiled a bit clearly, calmly said, "I love you." Then, as I received my kebab, I turned around where she was, and she was gone, vanished as quickly as she appeared. I inspected the ice cream, and it seemed okay, and package was intact. It was delicious. TLDR. Unknown but very kind stranger gave me ice cream, said "I love you" when I needed it, and then vanished. Back in 1997, I was aged 8. I shared a room with my younger brother who was 4 at the time. We used to have our grandparents over for dinner most nights, and it wasn't uncommon for them to stay longer after we had gone to bed. They would come and kiss us goodbye in bed when they were going to leave. This one summer day, I woke up during the night and saw my granddad. It wasn't unusual, like I said. I said, "Hi, Granddad, are you leaving now?" He came and sat on my bed and said, "Yes, I'm saying goodbye for now." He kissed me and then went and sat on my brother's bed and said kissed him as well. Then he left. My childhood intuition picked up that he was a bit sad. Next morning, I went into the kitchen to find my mom crying. She told me that my granddad died last night of a sudden heart attack. I said, "How can that be? I saw him last night. He came and said goodnight to me." My mom said that my grandparents left shortly after I went to bed last night. I also remembered that my grandpa said goodbye and not goodnight. It was quite a shock, but at the same time, a little comforting too. I don't remember a lot from my childhood, but this is a memory that I won't forget. There was a kid I used to hang out with when I was around 8 years old, and it still upsets me. He wasn't from my school, and neither was he in the only other school in town. One day he just showed up at the end of school day and played with my friends and I, just like kids do. He was really nice, polite, clean, but he just seemed to have no family. He would never talk about his parents and avoided conversations about family. There was some sort of orphanage nearby, but friends who lived there said that he didn't live with them. He was weird, but in a weird way. He was nice and fun, yet really mature for an 8-year-old kid. He had this emotional intelligence. He understood people, talked very well about the other's feelings, but barely showed his. He had this strange aura. He would start really deep conversations that were oddly deep for kids our age. He also had a smooth voice, at an age when most of the kids have a voice that tempts adults to make them mute. One day, one of my friends lost his grandma, and he found oddly accurate words to reassure him. That scene is still in my head to this day. On the other hand, he knew no cultural stuff. Every film, cartoons, comics, every TV show, he wouldn't know. We showed him stuff like WWE, Dragon Ball, and other manga/anime, and he became really fan. The only times he would act childish was when we wanted to know more about his life. He would answer funny and barely comprehensive things like some kids do. Today, I'm 100% sure he did that on purpose. I really looked up to him, although he was no leader or whatever. He was weird in a cool way, or cool in a weird way, at an age when a weird kid is just a weird kid and no one wants to FW. He felt out of this world to me. My mother had a strange feeling about him, and years later I asked her about him, and she told me that she couldn't do anything because he was so nice and polite, but to her he wasn't a child and seemed really weird. He just hung out with my friends and I for about a year. I have great memories with him and feel like he taught us much. One day he just stopped coming to play in our neighborhood and no one saw him again. I have more anecdotes about him, and as time passes, more things feel wrong or weird to me. I have a deep feeling that I met someone too special or whatever. I'm not that much into supernatural stuff yet. I could start believing in a lot of things just because of this kid. A little over 20 years ago, my friends and I went to a 4th of July party at the house of a guy that went to high school with. It started out pretty chill, but as the night went on, it ended up being the kind of party I don't think actually existed outside of an 80s teen movie. huge house in a rich neighborhood, no regard for property damage. Picture the party at the end of Weird Science, but subtract the mutant bikers and add a couple hundred kids in their teens and early 20s, half of whom were on LSD, and many of whom showed up with literal carloads of fireworks. At some point, these two guys showed up. Nobody knew who they were. They spoke to no one, not even each other. They didn't eat anything. They didn't drink anything. They didn't try to interact with anyone at all that I saw. What they did do was freak everyone straight the fuck out. Visually, they were exactly average. Average height, average looks, average build, ambiguous age, ambiguous ethnicity, 100% forgettable, except they absolutely radiated darkness and hostility. They would just stand on opposite sides of a room and glare angrily at each other for a while, then walk into a different room to glare angrily at each other again. They seemed to communicate with each other like that. Creepy as hell. It was like there was some kind of evil force inside of them that was barely contained by their skin. If they walked into a room where you were, it felt like the air itself suddenly became oppressive. At some point, my friends and I dipped out to go check out another party up in the mountains, and a couple of people we knew took off to a different party in a town in the opposite direction of where we were going, and about 30 miles away from the original party. About halfway to our destination, we stopped at a gas station to get smokes and drinks. When we walked out, those guys were there. They were standing outside of their car, perfectly still, just staring holes through us. I don't know if I've ever felt that creeped out. We all piled into our car in record time and peeled out the parking lot. Thankfully, it didn't look like they tried to follow us, and we never saw them again. A few hours later, we went back to the first party to find a girl we knew sitting on the floor holding a baseball bat, jumpy as hell, ready to swing at anything that looked threatening. Apparently, those guys got way creepier after we left. Nobody would go into any detail though, so I never found out exactly what happened, but everyone who had stayed at the first party looked thoroughly shook. The next day I ran into one of the people that took off to the other party, and right about the same time we had our gas station encounter with the spooky twins, they had the exact same encounter with the same guys at a gas station probably 50 miles away from where we were. Meanwhile, the people who stayed at the first party swear those guys didn't leave the party until hours after we saw them at the gas station. It was all intensely freaky. I don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, but I have genuine doubts as to whether they were really human. As a child, I used to play outdoors with my childhood best friend Kyle. We would either knock on each other's doors and ask can blank come out to play, or we would hear each other in our respective front yards and come outside. One day when I was about 10, I walked outside into my driveway because I thought I heard Kyle outside. I called out to him and a little girl about my age came from around the back of the house instead. I learned her name was Amaya. She told me she was going to be there all day because she's waiting for her mom to pick her up. I asked her if Kyle was coming, but she said no. Kyle didn't technically live next door, his grandmother did, so it's not uncommon for him to not be on the block for days because he's at home. So, we spent the whole day playing. I can't remember the exact time, but I know it was from the hottest point in the day to when the sun almost began to set. It was the peak of summer, so that meant we were outside for hours. We spent the first half of our day inside of my garage playing because it was cool, and as outside began to get cooler, we moved our shenanigans out into my driveway. After a couple of hours, she said that she had to go because her mom was coming soon. I hugged her, really sad that my new cool friend was leaving, but I figured she must be related to my neighbors in some way, so I'd be seeing her again. The next day, Kyle's mom dropped him off at his grandma's, so I came outside to play. I asked him where Amaya was coming back. Kyle said, "Who's Amaya?" I thought he was just being annoying, but by us going back and forth, I realized he really didn't know who Amaya was. I told him she had on a blue top and blue khakis yesterday, and her hair was in 3 large twists with pink bobos. Kyle insisted he didn't know who I was talking about. I asked his brother, who was 5 years his senior. He didn't know who I was referring to either. A little creeped out, I asked my parents, wasn't I playing with a girl yesterday? My mom and dad had no idea what girl I was talking to. They thought I was outside in the garage playing by myself. As a last resort, I asked Kyle's grandma. She told me there was no little girl there yesterday. She was home with her husband, and she didn't know a little girl by that name. To this day, Kyle swears he doesn't know who I'm talking about. I don't know what to make of the situation. I know I played outside with that girl. We jumped rope, we blew bubbles, we played hand numbers. No one knows a little girl named Amaya, but I spent the day with her. Was coming back on the plane from a very important job interview, and I thought I blew it. I was spacing out during the entire flight, and when the plane landed and I finally got up to grab my bags, an older woman 3 aisles down from me looked straight at me and said, "Don't worry, it'll be okay. You'll get it." I reflexively thanked her and ignored what she said, but a few hours later I got a call that I got the job. Only then did I remember what she said. I still don't know why she said that and how she knew what my problem was. I swear, 2 girls working at my local Starbucks are Nordic blondes. Insanely tall, blank stare, both speak to each other without actually speaking. If you make small talk, they have to think for an awkward amount of time to form the most perfect response in a monotone voice. They are insanely tall. Their skin is almost the color white, and their eyes are like ice. I told my wife about them, and if she had seen them, and she hadn't. A few weeks later, she comes in saying she talked to the strangest girl working at Starbucks, almost like she wasn't human. I described one of the girls, and my wife's face went straight to shock validation. There is something off about those two, but in a very non-threatening way. Also, they work alone together, just the 2 of them, at the only Starbucks for miles. Not a thing out of place. Serious. Frequent travelers of Reddit. What's something you saw when traveling that was so scary you never went back somewhere? It happened in Vietnam in the middle of nowhere. I was just hopping on my scooter outside a 7-Eleven when a young woman ran into the store screaming. She was clearly beaten and her clothes were ripped. A few seconds later, 3 men came after her, drag her outside, and force her into a car. One of the men had a knife in their hand. I was so shocked I wanted to help, but I was too afraid to do something. She looked at me, yelling and banging at the car window when they drove away. I still think about her sometimes and feel guilty for my non-action. My sister, my mom, and I were almost trafficked. We were originally from the Balkans, living in Germany. When my parents divorced, my mom took us for a holiday back home. The bus drive was 30+ hours. We almost arrived, and my uncle was supposed to pick us up at the bus station, but we didn't arrive. It was around 11 p.m., and the bus driver said we had a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. There were 3 other women left in the bus. They started crying, since they told us there were some nice taxis waiting for us on the street to bring us to our homes, which, in retrospect, was ridiculous since we all lived in different cities. But my mom and sister already got into the taxi, bags in the trunk. Then, the women started screaming and crying, trying to call their husbands. Luckily, one husband wasn't living far away, so he came with his family, and the bus drivers were scared and the taxis left. Long story short, we later found out that a lot of women and girls went missing the last couple of months due to human trafficking. Throughout high school, me and some friends had these trips to South Texas desert near the border. We would camp out in the wilderness and shoot guns or build a bonfire. We graduated in 2004, our last trip was in 2005, and we had a really scary experience. We had a campfire going at night. For those that don't know, deserts actually get cold at night due to lack of humidity. So we had a campfire going, and 3 guys came out of the darkness into the light of the campfire. No hello, no what's up. In very basic English, the first guy says, "You come with us." This was not a request. We politely declined, and the other guy said something in Spanish and was extremely angry. The first guy said to come with them again. We refused, and he stepped forward. My friend panicked and pulled his shotgun out, screamed we weren't going anywhere. The English-speaking guy simply said, okay, stay. As he backed up, they left, and we quickly put out the fire. I made sure everyone grabbed their wallets and phones, old Razr flip phones. We got the hell out of there and sprinted towards the car. As we were driving away, we saw 3 sets of headlights driving over the flats. We killed the car lights and drove in darkness on the road until we lost sight of them. We drove to a sheriff's office to report what had happened. We were told that if our story was true, it's a real good thing we did not go with them. We went to the Dominican Republic for our honeymoon. One day, we decided to take a day trip that the resort was offering. The trip included sightseeing by bus, lunch, and a trip to a waterfall, and ended with a horseback ride. There were about 7 of us in the group. At the end of the day, we were on our way back to the stables and we ventured underneath a bridge. A dude appeared out of the dense bushes or trees, cussing at us and swinging a machete. One of the horses dumped its rider, and the rest of us took off while the tour guide negotiated with the man. We all made it back to the bus safely, but wide-eyed. Driving in Iceland during a blizzard was in March, and I was on the northwest part of Iceland near the West Fjords. I woke up and weather was clear, a bit cloudy, but no indication or forecast of any snow. About 30 minutes into driving, and boom, an immediate whiteout. The wind was horrible, heavy enough to push your car off the road, heavy enough to blow your car door off the hinge, almost hurricane-like but with snow instead of rain. That 2-hour blizzard dumped about 6 feet of snow. I was by myself in a Kia Picanto. The road was not very developed, in not very populated part of the country, and no phone service. Dumbest decision I've ever made was underestimating the weather. I won't go back because I'm too stupid to deserve to see that beautiful country again. It's also an expensive country. Halifax a few years ago. Lovely city, and I would go back in a heartbeat, but seeing a tropical storm on Peggy's Cove was a surreal experience. It hit the day I was supposed to leave. My flight was canceled. I got really sick that day too, so it was a blessing in disguise. Plus the hotel I stayed in was allegedly haunted. A small little home turned into a hotel. I had to move into the basement on the last day as my room was booked. Thank goodness they had a room for me to move into. But that hotel won't go back. Nope. The basement was scary as fuck. Ironically, I went to the gravesite as part of the Titanic tour and felt more relaxed there. Olney, Illinois. Had my car windows, left rear and rear, shot out as I was traveling south and approaching a railroad overpass. Bullet entered through the left rear window and exited out the rear window. I continued south until I was able to pull into a convenience store to examine the damage and to call the local police. When the police arrived, they looked at my shot-out windows and said, this hasn't happened for a couple of months now. So it must be a somewhat regular thing in Olney, Illinois for the cop to be so blasé about it. I will never go back to that place. Thailand, Pai. When I was dating my girlfriend, we were there. Pai is a sort of out-of-the-nowhere and popular with hippie hipster tourist spot. They also shot some famous Asian movies in this village, so although it's out in the nowhere, it was still quite popular. First thing we noticed was how many stray dogs there were. It was not normal. About 20 dogs wherever you go, and they just walk into restaurants to beg for food, etc. They were all super friendly and chill. When we went there was this huge reggae event. We went there and it lasted till 2 a.m. or so. You had to catch the shuttle bus to get back into the village since it was far out in the fields. When we were back in the village, we couldn't find where we parked our scooter. It was scary to search for your bike in the middle of the night with a lot of dogs following us and just watching us. When we finally found the bike and drove back to our resort, something strange happened. We saw a lady in the middle of the road at 3 or 4 a.m. at this point, dressed in a long black dress and long black hair in the middle of the road we had to pass to get to the resort. She was flailing her arms around but didn't move her feet or move at all, and there were 30 or so dogs in a circle around her, barking like crazy, but none of them went close to the lady. I thought I saw things, but my girlfriend saw it too, and I told her to keep driving and don't stop. The resort was nearby, so we wanted to warn them about it and maybe someone needed help, but there was nobody to be seen for some reason. The barking also stopped, and we decided to get to our room and sleep. Well, nope. Over the night, we heard someone knocking on our door and window every now and then, heard the dogs in the distance again, out of the gate, and it continued. The next day, we decided to get the fuck out of this town, but every single bus was full due to this reggae event. I decided to pay a driver, who approached us for a private drive for 4 times the price, but we just said yes, get us out of here. To this day, we still don't know what it was about and felt so bad if it was really a lady who was just crazy and needed help. But every alarm went off, and I think it was a good call to keep driving. I hope. I once attended a work training event at a nice hotel in Dallas. For some backstory, I was a 19 to 20-year-old girl. During some downtime in the evening, I decided to walk across the street to a drugstore and purchase some snacks and water. The hotel sold a single water bottle for $7, so I wasn't having that. As I got to the drugstore, there were 4 or 5 men in a car and they were yelling strange things at me. It scared me and made me feel a bit uneasy, but I went inside and stayed inside the drugstore for a bit longer to wait them out. I decided to go back to the hotel after a while, so I walked outside and they were still there, waiting for me. At this point, I was very scared, and these guys were all yelling things at me. I ran across the street even though the crosswalk wasn't telling me I could go. I ended up making it. I went up to my room paranoid that they would be able to see what floor the elevator went to. After a while inside my room, I stupidly figured that they were gone. As I didn't see them follow me into the hotel, I assumed I was being paranoid about the whole thing, so I went downstairs to smoke a cigarette by the fountain at the hotel. At this point, the smoking age was still 18 in both my state and Texas. After I got down there and smoked for a bit, I truly realized my mistake. The men were there in the same car. They were yelling at me. One of them was speaking with a valetman, hotel employee, and looking at me. I immediately called my mom. She was yelling at me and scared for me. Then I got off the phone with her to call one of the women who was in training with me. Toward the end of the phone call with the woman I was training with, a man approached me from the group saying how beautiful I was, and then walked away and watched me with the group of men. The hotel employee was nearby, and I kept making looks at him, showing that I was scared and uncomfortable, but he had no response. I thought to myself that maybe these men were also staying in the hotel, so that could have been why they were there. But soon after the call, the woman came and found me and stayed with me. She was older than me and seemed very much like she could be my mother, so she stared them down with the most mama bear look I've ever seen, and they ended up leaving soon after. At that point, I realized they had never been staying at that hotel, and those men were definitely 100% going to do something to me if she wasn't there. The next day, I spoke to some of the other women in my training class, and one of them was literally drugged by a man from the hotel. She had completely blacked out and woke up with her face down on a table outside with no memory of it. It turned out that the Dallas area was known for sex work, but I'm not sure if that contributed to what happened to either of us. Whenever I was visiting my girlfriend at her college, we would always go to this fairly grimy club in New Haven. I say this because while waiting online, I saw a young college girl squat behind a car while some small trickle of pee ran down her leg. My girlfriend and I couldn't move off the line, and we both could have looked away, but meh. So anyways, this club had these dancers on the pole doing their thing. Loud hip-hop was playing, and we had drinks in our hand. Night was going well, and after an hour and a few more mixed cocktails, I start to feel it. The room starts tilting when I notice someone more fucked up than me. I know she's fucked up because her long hair is covering the front of her face, and she's barely standing up. Her ankles were buckling like Bambi, and the guy behind her looked sus. He was in ripped jeans, a backwards cap, and a shirt with a few stains. I don't know why, but like before, I kept staring. My girlfriend, I think, was talking to her other friends about some creepy old guy with white hair trying to hit on girls. I keep tugging on her shirt. Then, like that weird scene in Big Fish, the one where everything slows down and the guy walks through the carnival, well, this guy has the same effect. The song slows, and the girl just buckles, drops like she just got knocked the F out. Her head tilts back, she's out, and as she's falling on the guy, he just hoists her up on his shoulders like a sack of potatoes and books it. He was so fast, I felt like I was watching Mario Brothers on a speed run. Before I could say anything or do anything, they just disappear into the crowd, and a bouncer just whips his head in their direction. To this day, I wonder about that girl and the guy who just picked her up like a leprechaun and his sack of gold. My girlfriend thinks I made it up, but every time I can't shake it off. I think that girl was drugged. I keep thinking. I got into a minibus accident in the mountains of Bolivia. The air brakes failed as we were driving down the mountainside. All of a sudden, the driver's side passenger jumped out of the bus on the road. Then, all of us passengers started to jump from the moving bus, hitting dirt and rolling. The bus ended up crashing into one of those runoffs built into the side of the mountain. Terrifying experience. From then on, I took trains and planes when possible. I don't know if I'd venture to Bolivia again. As a young man, I used to road trip frequently. I'd get some cash in my pocket on payday and just pick a direction. Once I ended up in a very rural eastern Oregon. As the sun was going down, I saw that a gate to a closed highway was open just a bit, and I was able to drive past it. This particular highway crossed a pass in the mountains. The highway being closed wasn't being plowed for snow, but there were only a few inches of snow on the road at higher elevations. At first, it was magical. The car, slicing silently through the snow as the sun was setting, no other tracks. I felt alone in the world. I kept driving maybe 60 to 70 miles as the sun set, and I entered the other side of the pass. Wending my way down a canyon by myself, the stars brighter than I'd ever seen them, but the landscape completely devoid of light, humming along with the engine burbling at 25 miles per hour. As I approached a switchback corner, I hit my brakes for the first time in a while. and the chrome grille of an old pickup truck no more than 2 feet off my rear bumper lit up, reflecting my brake lights. No headlights on, no way to see more of the truck, no way to see the driver. He was just following me silently. I'm fairly well acquainted with driving quickly in inclement conditions. I pushed my old Subaru to its limits, trying to get away from this guy. But every time I hit the brakes, his truck was 2 feet off my back bumper. I eventually got to the other side of the pass, tore my car up bypassing the very closed gate, and hit a major highway. Seriously, fuck that guy. We brought our big pickup truck out in the middle of the woods, and right as we were going across a trail line, an old lady that looks like a witch, a seemingly paranoid camper, warned us against something like this, comes out of nowhere, and she kept insisting we get out of the car so she can help us with something. My dad just kept saying no, and eventually he revved on the engine, and the back of the car swung around like a movie, and we got out of there. Me and my husband live in Texas. He likes casinos, so once a year we drive up to Oklahoma to go to a casino. I'm perfectly content watching our daughters in the hotel while he goes and mildly gambles for a few hours. Then he watches them while I go get a massage the next day. About 3 months ago, we pack up for our annual trip and head to Oklahoma. We make reservations online through a booking website, but when we got to the hotel, they denied our reservation, saying it never existed. We drive to numerous hotels in the area, all are booked. Apparently there was the Redneck Truck Festival, WTF, that same weekend. It's 11 p.m. at this point. The kids are sleeping in the back and we're desperately trying to find a hotel. We end up in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, and stumble upon a motel. It's sketchy, but the girls need to get out of the car and sleep in a proper bed. We decide to try to get a room, then leave first thing in the morning and head home, 5 hours away. My husband goes into the lobby and successfully gets a room. I have no idea which town we are in. I feel like I'm in a horror movie. The atmosphere is just creepy. No other buildings around except this motel, no cars in the parking lot except ours and a few others. We start unloading the car and get the girls inside and tucked in. I told my husband I left my purse in the car and went out to get it. I see the person that checked us in smoking a cigarette by the car. I say hello, and he approaches me. You know, it's dangerous out here for a young lady like yourself. The man looks like he's in his 30s and looks dirty. I give him a nervous laugh and say, yeah, but my husband is inside, so I'm okay. He proceeds to walk closer to me and said my kids were cute. Now I'm worried because he never saw my kids. They were sleeping in the car, so at this point I can only assume he saw us bring them into the room, which is odd because our room was nowhere close to the lobby. I understand he was smoking, but he could have just walked out of the lobby and smoked by the door. It's around 11 p.m., so I doubt any guests are arriving, so your smoke isn't going to bother anyone. Instead, he walked around the back where we were to smoke. He then asked me to walk with him to the lobby so he could give me another key card for the room. Apparently, he only gave my husband one instead of two. I said no, we were fine with one and ran inside. I told my husband what happened and we locked the door with the extra lock, you know, the one that has the chain, so that way if someone who had a key card tried to get in, they couldn't because of the chain lock. We woke up at 6 a.m. and left. To this day, I still have no idea what town that was, but we aren't going back to Oklahoma for a while. Hikers of Reddit, what is the weirdest, creepiest thing that you've come across while hiking? I didn't know ticks infest trees, let alone one hanging over the side of a cliff. Then one day I used one to hold myself up to get across a dangerous spot. Saw it was covered in ticks, but couldn't go back without going forward first, then had to use it again going the other way. Real Indiana Jones sticking his hand in snakes moment for me. When I was a teenager, I was out hiking with a couple of friends. We were off trail, taking an improvised shortcut. We came across a scarecrow of some kind just out in the middle of the woods. Had moss and lichen growing all over it. I remember it had a maroon jacket and some kind of shriveled burl for a head. The clothes and size of it looked like it was made as an effigy of some kid, probably late tweens. We don't know how long it had been there, but it gave us the creeps. Not creepy, but definitely weird. Was hiking on a trail with my family, Central Ontario, occasionally passing other people. I stopped to admire a rock face and pond when I hear, "Is that a lion cub?" Turned around and yep, here is a family walking their dogs and a lion cub. It walked near to where I was to look at the water and I got permission to pet it. It felt like a woolly softness. Rest of the hike was beautiful and saw a waterfall. Was hiking along a stream while exploring out in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly I hear an ear-splitting shriek from up ahead. As I round the corner, I see a deer lying in the grass opposite bank from where I was, and its throat was ripped out. Only thing in the area that could do that was a cougar. Needless to say, my exploring was over for the day. Another kid and I found where the county dumped all of the highway railway roadkill. It was this huge pile of rotting corpses and bones of cattle, horses, moose, deer, coyotes, larger birds, eagles and owls, dogs, cats, etc. We weren't even that far down what we thought was an oil and gas site trail in the woods near where we lived. I told my mom, and the next time we went back a few days later, they had removed almost everything to a much more hidden location where stupid kids wouldn't find it. I got off the Trans-Canada Highway at an outhouse rest stop. There was a semicircle of flat-topped boulders in front of the outhouse. When I came out of the bathroom, there was a perfectly intact dead woodpecker on the middle rock. Of course, since I'm into vulture culture, I just tried to figure out if I could get it 7 hours home without stinking up my car. I ended up leaving it. My small group was hiking back to our cars on a very long, closed-off dirt trail tucked into Jemez Mountains in New Mexico. Because the dirt road was closed off, we hiked about 4, maybe 5 miles to a hot spring at the very end. It was getting dark as we were on our way back to the road where we parked, maybe halfway through the trail. We passed a young lady walking by herself in the direction we came from, which leads back to the hot springs. She had very long black hair and wore all black clothes and boots. She seemed to be Native American in ethnicity, but I could be wrong. When we passed her, we said hello, but she did not acknowledge us or even look in our direction. It's like we weren't even there. Keep in mind, we were the only ones out there and had not seen any other people on the trail. By the time she would reach the hot springs, it would be completely dark with no cell reception, and she was all alone. We got back to the cars and noticed no other cars parked at the trailhead. Any form of civilization would have been quite a few miles in any direction from there. It creeped us out, but we also felt very worried about her. The fact she seemed to ignore us made us feel like she would not appreciate us following her on a dark trail, so we left. I hope she was alright, but also, maybe she was just a badass. Not my story, but scared the hell out of me hearing about it. My boyfriend and his buddy were scouting out the new places to fish. They were hiking down to a spot near the water and started to get a bad feeling. My boyfriend goes back into the car, but his buddy is on the phone because his girlfriend called. A car pulls up behind them and doesn't slow down. When it starts getting way too close to their bumper, my BF yells at my friend to get in the car and they speed off. The other car starts chasing them, follows them for about 20 minutes. They pull into a gas station to see if the car will leave. It's a single pump gas station, and the other car pulls on the other side and they make eye contact. The guy gives them a scary look and reaches into his glove box. They speed out again, and the guy still follows them. After about 10 to 15 minutes on the interstate, the guy pulls off and makes an illegal U-turn. After hearing the story, I told him I think they should have called the police and pulled into the nearest station. They said that was their next move. It's crazy, because they think that there was something down by the water or trail they weren't supposed to find. Friend and I were exhausted, coming off a mountain. We both saw the parking lot through the trees. It looked like maybe 50 feet away. We thought it was odd that there were so many cars in the lot, and we were clearly seeing the exact same ones. My truck, red car next to it, then a black car, etc. We kept on the trail and didn't reach the parking lot for another 45 minutes. The parking lot we had seen was a complete hallucination, but we saw the exact same thing at the same time. When I was hiking in the Arizona mountains and my feet were starting to hurt, so I sat down on a rock near a bunch of cow turds and took off my boots. I set them aside and started chowing down on some string cheese I brought along with me. I'm sitting there for 15 minutes, enjoying the sun. It was a very mild week temperature-wise, boots in my field of view, and a fucking full-ass baby Arizona bark scorpion comes casually strolling out of my fucking shoe. Quite literally, one of the most dangerous scorpions in North America. I was 2 days worth of hiking away from my car. I fucking flipped. I poked him on the butt with a blade of grass and sat there for an hour procrastinating about putting my shoes on even after checking a dozen times. Fun experiences in Arizona. I was 10 or more miles into the wilderness of the northern Rockies trout fishing with my backpacking companion on a small stream. Hadn't seen another soul all day. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, there's a game warden just a few feet away walking briskly toward me and demanding to inspect my creel. It was unnerving as hell how this man apparently popped into existence from nothingness, almost within whispering distance. It was a little creepy. I had newfound respect for the guy's ability to be stealthy. I also had newfound disrespect for my own situational awareness skills. When I was a kid, me and my stepdad were mountain bike riding on a trail that was really close to metro suburbs. We get to the lake and start skipping rocks. Next thing we know, we hear rustling in the bushes of a steep hillside that connects to a main road. Guy walks by and asks where the nearest trail is, so we direct him. He was in a hurry, rushed, etc. We get back to the main trail on our bikes and into the roads of the suburbs. 2 cop cars pull up with shotguns and rifles asking if we saw a man. Apparently, dude was wanted in 6 counties, 2 of which were from another state. Weirdest experience, I think, of my life. This happened a month ago in Panama. I'm a woman and I was traveling with 2 other girls. If you're not aware, since 2014, there were 2 Dutch girls who went missing on a hiking trail and whose remains were later found in one region of Panama, and an American girl who was murdered on a hiking trail in a different part of Panama. Both incidents happened in a very touristy spot, so we were already kind of scared while hiking in Panama. Anyways, back to the story. We were on a hike in Santa Fe. A hike goes through the jungle, and a hiking trail is not on the map. The head of the trail started off road, and then you have to go through a tiny village, just 6 or 7 houses. We asked the people in the village if we were on the right way, because in the article about this trail that we found on the internet, the description of the trail didn't match the trail we were on at all. But the people confirmed it was the right way. So we go through the jungle for 40 minutes or an hour. Finally, we reach the waterfall we were looking for. We're all standing in front of the waterfall, and suddenly a young man appears behind us, literally out of nowhere. It was one of the men who saw us in the village. One of the girls, the one who was always walking the last in line, says, "Girls, he was following us the whole time. I looked back once and I saw him, but he kind of jumped back into the shadow of the trees." The fear I experienced that moment is impossible to describe. We just stand there and look at him. In front of us, in the waterfall. Behind us is the slippery jungle trail that you have to climb up to get back to the road. He silently looks at us and doesn't say anything. It's so creepy and scary, I was about to pass out. Then he tried to say something in Spanish, but our Spanish is pretty non-existent, and so was his English. He asks us in broken English if we're going to swim in the waterfall. At this point, we definitely don't want to swim or do anything else at all. We just wanted to get away from him. He went for a quick swim, and we started climbing the trail up to the village. He followed us back as we walked, but the closer we were getting back to the village, the further was the distance between him and us. By the time we reached the village, we couldn't see him behind us anymore. I still have too many questions. Why did he follow us? Did he hope we will go for a swim and he can watch us? Did he hope he can sneakily steal our phones while we were swimming? Did he want to make sure we didn't get lost or injured? Why did he hide from us and followed us with a distance like that? It was so bizarre. Like, if he wanted to be a nice guide to us and make sure we reached the waterfall safely, then why didn't he go from the village to the waterfalls with us? Why did he wait for us to start the trail and followed us behind so we couldn't see him? In the end, no harm was done, and I think he didn't have any sinister intentions, but my God, after these 3 women dying on the hiking trails in Panama, we were on high alert already, and his actions scared the shit out of us. Hiking down Mount Adams at night with some buddies as we stayed up way later than we planned. Came across a strange old woman with longer silver hair climbing in almost no gear, lights or heavy coats or anything. Told us how it was a wonderful night and then kept going. The moon came up over the horizon as a deep blood-red crescent, and we started seeing weird rune-like markings in the snow. Initially, we thought they were pole marks, but they were clearly drawn by someone off the side of the trail. As we came off the mountain into the dead forest, we started to get some serious deja vu, like we were looping back on ourselves, and it felt really weird. I've done a lot of night hiking, and it was unusual. By the time we got back to the car, we were half convinced the forest was haunted and that the lady was the spirit of Klickitat or something. Not scary, haunted, just odd. My husband was out hiking on forest land and he was approached by a group of Hispanic guys with assault rifles and walkie-talkies asking him what he was doing out there. He tells them he's hunting. He said he could hear a guy over the walkie-talkie saying in Spanish that they have eyes on him, so he casually glances around and sees someone with a gun pointed at him from further up the hill. He also hears in Spanish, "Get rid of him." At this point, the guy he's talking to asks why he's in that particular location. So he points to the bear he just killed and explains that his truck is a bit up the hill, so this was the fastest route back. The guy tells him to be careful roaming the woods and let him on his way. My husband is Hispanic too, but looks white. He thinks they were growing weed out in the woods and he was about to stumble upon their grow site. I don't think they realized he could understand their Spanish conversation. One day when I was 16, I'd had an argument with my boyfriend at the time and left his house rather upset. At the end of his road was a series of fields. Instead of walking home, I thought it would be a good idea to go for a long walk and burn off the anger. I walked for maybe an hour and a half, just loads of long fields, until finally at the far end was a big forest. I could see a big dark hole in the tree line, which people obviously used as a way to get into it as it was very dense. Stupidly, I thought, yes, this is a fantastic idea. Let's go explore the forest completely on my own when it's starting to get dark. I'm a female, by the way, so into the woods I went. Everything was fine for 10 minutes or so, and then it started to get a bit weird. First, I came across a noose hanging from a tree. I figured it's some stupid teenagers like myself who were trying to be edgy. The rope seemed new, and there was nothing noteworthy about it other than the creepy fact it's a noose. So I kept walking. That's when the flies appeared. So many flies. I had to pull my hoodie up around my mouth and nose to prevent from breathing them in because they were everywhere. Still, I kept going. Finally, I came to a small clearing where a tree had been cut down and I guess used as a bench to sit on, but in front of it was some kind of messed up stake sticking out of the ground. This thing was covered in congealed dark stuff, which I can only assume was blood. Realized this was the source of the flies. Whatever it was on that thing, it fucking stank. I stood there in shock for a moment, trying to think of a rational explanation, and figured maybe some sick fucks were messing with animals or something. But that's when I noticed the 3 tents that were sitting behind the fallen tree. I finally noped the fuck out of there, legging it back all the way I had come and making it home a couple of hours later. I told my mom everything and she called the police. I explained to them everything I'd found and tried my best to give them directions. They could take a look themselves, but we never heard back from them. I have no idea if it was kids fucking around or something more sinister, like satanic worshipping, psycho, but I'm so glad I didn't disturb whoever was in those tents. I've come across quite a few things, but this past weekend my wife and I went kayaking down a local river. We dropped our kayaks off at the launch, which is common in the morning, to a typically busy but now desolate launch spot. It was pretty early as we were doing a 16-miler. This was at about 8 a.m. Drove one of our vehicles to the pickup spot and drove back to the launch. There was a very decrepit Jeep Cherokee at the launch now. It's about 8:30. I figured he was getting ready to fish, but there's no other boats or kayaks and no fishing gear. Guy gets out and walks off into the brush. I figured to pee. He comes back and a woman steps out of the Jeep. I don't like to be judgmental, but these two looked strung out. They start to do an impromptu photo shoot with their phones. Odd. Wife and I talk about how odd it is, and I half-jokingly said, they probably were eyeing our kayaks to steal. This launch is literally in the middle of nowhere, as in you either have to be a fisherman or kayaker to know where this is, as there really was no other purpose for them to be there. We load our kayaks and walk them to the water. They follow us down a narrow trail to the water and start asking us about spots to fish from one of the banks that's public. I engage in conversation, but started to feel uneasy with them as they kept getting closer to us. I unholster my concealed firearm to put into my waterproof bag, and they back up and just stand there and watch us launch. I have no idea what their intent was. Did they really want to scout a new fishing spot? Steal our kayaks? Drown us in the water? No idea. I'm a bigger dude, so I don't know why they'd choose us as victims, but as I said, They appeared strung out on something, and I didn't want to chance it at 8:30 in the morning. I just told my wife, at least we left your car at the launch. All they'd get is a shit car full of dog hair. Her car was fine when we got back to it. Not hiking, but I recently bought an electric mountain bike, and on my very first day of riding it, I was taking advantage of my new ability to ride up to places I would never normally ride to on a normal bike. I saw an old logging road leading up to a mountain from the main road and decided to see what was up there and check out the view. I rode way up, further than anyone would go on a normal bike, and it wasn't hiking trail, so nobody would walk all the way up there either. When I got up there, I started getting a creepy vibe, and then came across some kind of camp where someone was clearly living. It was a very creepy looking dilapidated shack, and there was so much garbage. It was early spring, and obviously someone was living up there all winter and just throwing their trash everywhere. It was disgusting, and very creepy. I didn't see or hear anyone at first, so I poked around a tiny bit, but was so creeped out, then I heard the voices. You might expect it to be a man's voice, some kind of worker dude, homeless bushman that lived up there in that filthy shack, but it wasn't. It was a woman's voice and a little girl's voice. It sounded like the little girl was playing right around the other side of the shack and the woman was talking to her. I was very creeped out and didn't want them to come around and see my creeping around their disgusting, scary shack, so I took off back down on my bike. Got home, and GF said, "How was your ride?" And I said, "Well, the very first hill I rode up to explore had creepy hill people living up there in a pile of garbage, so it was pretty fucking weird." What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? About 2 years ago, I had severe bronchitis. Severe coughing and shortness of breath were the main symptoms. I couldn't talk without coughing. I couldn't lay down to sleep without coughing. It got so bad one night I was home alone and I couldn't breathe deeply anymore. I could only take a shallow breath. My roommate was out of town and I had no one to reach out to. I started getting panicky because I was afraid I wouldn't ever be able to breathe normally again and that I would die because I couldn't breathe or catch my breath. I was 14, I think. Went on a swinging boat ride at the fair, the kind that paws upside down. The auto-locking seatbelt bar didn't lock all the way down against me, so when it stopped upside down, I started to slip out of my seat. It probably only lasted 10 to 15 seconds until we went down again, but I was holding myself into the car for dear life. Pretty scary, but it didn't kill my love of roller coasters. Was at a house party, and we were in the basement. We were warned by the host of the party that her cousin James was there and that he wasn't quite right mentally, but didn't really specify how. Probably about an hour into the party, we're just standing around talking and dancing when out of nowhere, James comes running through the basement from upstairs and jumped through a wooden door clear through to the other side like the fucking Kool-Aid man. Then, the guy who was bartending or DJing cut the music, pulled a gun out from his waistband, held it up and said, "Party's over, everyone." I've never ran out of a house faster in my life. That was almost 20 years ago, and to this day, I still don't know exactly what the fuck was going on. I was about 12 and kayaking with my dad down a creek near our house. The water was moving very fast because it had just rained. We were coming up on a corner and he yelled at me to stick my paddle in the water to turn. I couldn't seem to move and crashed right into the bank of the creek. I latched onto a root of a tree while my kayak floated downstream. I stayed in the water for about 20 minutes, screaming for help, hoping someone would hear me. No one did. So I looked around and saw another branch about 10 feet down where I could get onto the ground and climb up. I let go of the one I was on, and in about 2 seconds, I was the one I wanted to get to. I then floated there for a bit and got the strength to climb onto solid ground. I climbed up and around a small hill to get to my dad, who had somehow retrieved both kayak and paddle. We hugged, promised to never tell Mom, and rode the kayaks to our house. People attempted to carjack me in Milwaukee. They blocked the entrance to a restaurant I was eating at with a car, pulled up next to me in a second car like a bat out of hell, so close I wouldn't have been able to open my driver's side door. Then 4 people ran out of their car to prevent me from leaving. I threw it into reverse and looked over to see my friend Rory was hanging onto my passenger side door. I slowed a second and screamed at him, "Rory, get in the fucking car!" The carjackers jumped out of the way as I drove around the other side of the restaurant to a clear exit and then sped down 27th Avenue going about 120 miles per hour, worried that they'd follow me. I was swimming way out in the ocean in St. Croix. There was this huge drop-off, basically like an underwater cliff, where if you looked down it was just a pitch-black bottomless pit. Anyway, that was creepy, but not the scary part. Started swimming back to the beach, and 4 barracuda swam by me. I just kind of floated underwater, watching them pass by me, trying to be still and not freak the F out. Oddly enough, they had no interest in me at all. According to the movies, I should have been dead meat. I spent 3 hours in a police station in Shanghai, China. I'd been out to dinner that night with a friend. He talked to me about another girl who was working at our company that he had a crush on, and I was ribbing him, telling him how he'd never have a chance, she was too beautiful. The man at the table next to us overheard us, got mad that a foreigner was taking a Chinese woman, and called the police, and said my friend was bragging to me about being a pedophile. This alone was enough for the police to come, put us in their cars, and take us to the police station for hours. Before this, we hadn't had any interaction with this man at all. I'd even looked over and thought, oh, he's kinda cute, when we sat down, but we never interacted with him at all. He just decided he had a problem with us, and caused 3 hours of drama at the police station for nothing. Nothing happened to him either. I don't even think he was reprimanded by the police. Probably when my dad had a seizure while driving up a very steep mountain highway with the cruise control set to 65. I had 2 options: jerk the wheel to the right and drive off a cliff and die, or jerk the wheel left and drive across a grassy median and 2 lanes of oncoming traffic to hopefully stop the truck on the smaller hillside on the opposite side of the highway. There was no third option to keep the wheel steady because the truck was already wobbling out of control by the time I realized what was happening. I took my chances with the oncoming traffic and somehow missed everyone and hit the hill on the left side. The airbag hit me so hard it temporarily knocked me unconscious. It scared me shitless. I was 15 when it happened, and I still have PTSD from it 16 years later. And that's how we found out my dad has epilepsy. Had an oil fire erupt explosively inside a wood stove. Someone had thrown a pop bottle full of used motor oil and that was capped. It blew the damper clean open and was causing the chimney pipes to shake violently like something in a movie. I emptied a fire extinguisher into it and it worked for a bit, but it reignited and stayed burning, but at a considerably slower roll. It was terrifying to nearly have a building burn down on you. I was in the middle of the crowd at the concert shooting in Las Vegas in 2017, deadliest mass shooting in US history. Jason Aldean was performing, and we thought it was fireworks until he was pulled off the stage. Everyone got down to the ground, and eventually I couldn't take getting shot at anymore and sprinted out of the venue, leaving my friends behind. If you know or Google, he was using an automatic, so it was just round after round after round of gunshots, not knowing if or when one was going to hit me or my friends. Called my parents, hysterical, to let them know I was okay, and walked to MGM. They had triage set up there, otherwise no one else there had any idea what had happened outside. Finally met up with one of my friends and thought we were safe. Then someone comes running through the casino saying there's an active shooter. There wasn't, so my friend and I darted and got split up again. I'm freaking out, trying to get a taxi or Uber back to my hotel because I'm thinking there are shooters everywhere now. One taxi kicks me out because I'm screaming to get to my hotel. Eventually I walk a couple blocks and I'm able to flag down a lift and get to my hotel. As I'm walking through the lobby, they announce they are shutting down the entrance to the hotel for safety, so I sprint to the elevators to finally get to my room before they shut the elevators too. Spent all night not sleeping, unable to comprehend what had happened, still triggered by gunshots. Leaving Chinatown in Chicago drunk at 3 a.m. after partying with my friends and walking toward the red line, slightly older male steps out behind a pillar with a gun 1 foot in front of my face, telling me to give him all the cash in my wallet. I was borderline blacking out, but remember laughing at the absurdity of what was happening and telling him I was a broke college student and only had plastic, so kick rocks. He pushed the barrel up to my jaw, then turned and ran off. I stumbled up to the train and sat down and simply started bawling my eyes out while an elderly Chinese woman rubbed my shoulder. Lived in the city at the time. My laptop's graphic card was dying and I needed to finish a large design project for my last semester in college. Immediately went to the store right before they closed and bought a new laptop as I needed one right away. On my way to hail a cab, I was attacked by a homeless man with a knife demanding my new laptop and my wallet while slashing at me nonstop. Fought him off and got the knife away from him somehow without getting cut or stabbed. A cab driver noticed immediately and was screaming he'd get help and was calling the police on his radio and cell phone. Homeless guy is crazy strong, is trying to get me to the ground. We're standing wrestling while he's trying to grab the laptop box, and I'm punching him anywhere and everywhere I can with all my strength without the madman flinching. He grabs a hold of my laptop box and he's trying to pull it away from my hands. Give him a huge front kick to the chest, and I winded him up enough to get him to let go, which makes me stumble backwards and fall on my ass while getting a face full of laptop in a box. As I sit there bewildered from the hit to my face, I see the homeless guy has his knife again and is running at me full charge. Halfway to me, a bunch of shots ring out and he drops like a sack of potatoes right in front of me. I was saved by the police. When they asked me why I didn't just give him the laptop, I told them I thought he would kill me no matter what I did, so I was just defending myself. Turns out the guy was a known drug addict, and they told me he was most likely high at the time and that they were able to respond so quickly because he had already stabbed and robbed someone nearby. After being interviewed for a long time and my official statement was made, the cab driver took me back to my apartment free of charge. Spent the next 3 hours crying in my wife's arms until we both fell asleep. Also, I finished the project and graduated. I was roofied. My drink was right next to me and I must have taken my eyes off of it for 3, maybe 5 seconds at the most. I'm lucky because the second I started to feel weird, I called my brother who happened to be working across the street, and he came and got me so nothing ever happened to me. But it's terrifying to think of what could have happened, who did it, and why. It was Christmas time years ago and I was going to Dollar Tree. While I was walking in the parking lot, a woman in a Chevy Blazer who was texting and going a little too fast for a parking lot turned straight at me. I put both my hands on her hood and I bent my knees in at just the right time. If I did not, those two things, I would have been hit really bad. As it was a woman who saw all this happen asked me if I was alright. It just shook me up. Could have been a lot worse. At first I wanted to pick the event where I was almost kidnapped when I was 8 during the yearly harvest festival of the small village I grew up. I only got rescued because one of our firefighters went pissing behind the main tent and saw me getting dragged away. But this happened so long ago and I don't even remember half of it, even though it's a story I always get to hear when I'm over for a visit and run in one of the 6 guys who punched my almost kidnapper to a bloody pulp. And the fact that it only happened because my mother rejected his flirting attempts. For whatever reason, he must have been thinking that kidnapping me would help him with getting in my mother's pants. Instead, I picked one of the last things my grandmother said to me right after we finished having breakfast. After I did the dishes and made myself ready for work, she said, "Don't leave, I'm going to die today." Easily the most scary thing I've ever experienced, and I still hate the fact that she was right. My mom once put all of us kids in a minivan during one of her episodes and drove up to a cliff's edge. She said she was going to kill us all. There was a creek below, so I was trying to unbuckle my little brother from his car seat while trying to find something to break the window with so we could escape. My sister was in the front seat begging her not to do it. It lasted like 10 minutes, and finally she just got weirdly silent and backed away from the cliff and said, "I'm sorry, I love you kids, I hope you know that." Another almost equally scary moment was a time I splashed my little brother in the face with pool water and he started to cough. She dragged me out of the pool and started filling up the bathtub, and then grabbed me and held my face underwater. A neighbor girl happened to be there playing with my sister. She grabbed the phone and screamed at my mom, "If you don't let him go, I'm calling the cops." I was in the army for 4 years with 2 deployments, and I have never been as scared as I was when I was a kid. Legit childhood trauma is worse than combat, at least in my case. When I was a young child, there was a thunderstorm so violent it ripped the roof off of my house. I grew up in Joburg, South Africa, where there were daily thunderstorms in summer. After the above incident, I developed a severe fear of thunderstorms. I would get anxiety attacks every time one occurred. I think it might even be on the level of PTSD. Strangely enough, I developed this weird ability to sense when a thunderstorm was approaching in my sleep. I would wake up a few minutes before every single storm. It was before the lightning, the thunder, or the rain even started, so I wasn't woken up by anything. I lost this ability when I adopted a kitten that would sleep in my bed and helped me partially overcome my fear. Adrenaline-wise, trying to separate two pathologically violent wiener dogs from a very lost porcupine that waddled onto the property, and they are so slow because they don't need to be fast like non-sharp animals. No injuries, thankfully, though I had to use my legs like hockey sticks to keep the dogs away until I could safely pick the little murderers up like handbags. X-Files-wise, move into my first petless apartment in Ironclad Skeptic when the usual horror movie bullshit starts. The sliding closet doors are always open, even though I strongly prefer to keep them closed, and I start experiencing weird bouts of false memories and/or sleepwalking. In one of these episodes, I distinctly remember just standing in the closet doorway at night, doing nothing while I stared into it. I also vividly remember the flash of the television illuminating the walls. I have no prior history of this behavior and rarely remember my dreams under normal circumstances. At night, when my room was almost completely dark, the shadow of my dresser opposite to the bed would always resemble a man in a cloak hunched over facing my laundry basket towards a corner, and it was so distinct my ex even commented on it without prompting. Eventually, we adopted a cat. One evening I get up from bed to pee, and I see my cat sitting down the hallway in the just caught crotch-licking pose, except he clearly has the face of an overweight old man with prominent side chops like Hugh Jackman. I chalked it up as sleepiness and tried my best to look away after my eyes failed to adjust. One time, at the beginning of last summer, we're searching everywhere for one of our tall fans that can reach the bed. I knew I put it away in the closet nearest the entrance for safekeeping, but it just vanished from the apartment. Eventually, my ex and I start to bicker because we've searched everything, and he's worried I threw it away without telling him. I go back to open the closet it should have been in, and like a magician's trick, it was right in front of us with a cord tangled aggressively and tautly around the entire thing in a way neither of us would have ever done to the wires. All we could say to each other all night after that was, "What the fuck?" The weird shit has mostly stopped after a year of living here, but there was other incidents as things slowly died down. There was a 2-week period my ex and I saw a gray, blurry doppelganger of our cat running around that absolutely couldn't be him, as he'd be on someone's lap as it was seen. Then it stopped appearing to us just as we got used to it. I'm not sure what to believe personally, but I do know my ex hated it when I joked about moving into the walls to live the closet people. What is the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? I was at a friend's house and a glass fell from a table, did like a reverse C-shaped maneuver and landed under the table. It was really weird. Another time, a candlestick flew from a shelf across the room. I still don't believe in ghosts, but it was certainly creepy. A family member died while hospitalized as we, the family, were there saying our goodbyes. The nurse came in, shut off the monitors, and left to give us space to grieve. The hospital window flew open 5 minutes into our grieving. There were no storms. There was no air movement or dispersed air pressure in the room. Nothing stood against the window, nor was anything pushing against it. Furthermore, I worked in this hospital and knew these windows were bolted to prevent jumpers. We all stared at each other, looked back at the deceased family member, and my cousin quietly closed the window. Intense scraping on my bedroom door when I was home alone. I lived in a rental with 3 friends and they were all working late shifts. I was in the attic room, so my door was down some steps inside my room. You could look over the railing and stand right above the door. I was watching YouTube and I swore I heard a cat pawing on the door. We don't have a cat. I paused the video and listened. There's nothing. I rewind the video and it wasn't coming from that either. I hear it again a few minutes later and pause. This time it lasted slightly longer and I knew I heard it. I go down and peek out. Nothing. I lock the door out of paranoia and go back to my computer and read articles instead. It was silent, and then the door started getting scratched again. I shout down there, "Who the fuck is there?" And it doesn't stop. I looked over the railing again and I see the door shaking. Eventually, someone comes home and we search the house to find nothing. This was also around the time I would often wake up and my brains would play tricks on me and I would see things floating through the room before fading away. I got so used to it that I would watch it until it was gone instead of jumping out of shock. I used to live above a funeral home, and I don't believe in ghosts, obviously, but once I was in bed and I swear I could hear what sounded like hands on the walls coming down the hallway. It actually made me shout, "Fuck off!" To which it stopped. It was pretty creepy. Then one time, we were looking after a dog and I was doing the washing up Pretty normal day, and the dog, an Alsatian, looked just behind me and went down into like attack position and started growling like mad. She was a pretty horrible dog, to be honest, but never did anything like that into what seemed like empty space. When I was 15 years old, an older French-Canadian man that I had just been introduced to leaned in and whispered to me that he wanted to, and I quote, lick the backside of my belly button. Gag. I'm not even 100% sure what that meant, but I know that his French accent made it so much creepier. I've had 3 dreams where I talked to my mother who died giving birth to me. The house I live in is haunted. It's an old house my grandpa lived in forever. It's haunted, but not like The Conjuring or Poltergeist. These ghosts don't do shit. I was in hospital a few years ago. Broke my arm. I was like 11. I wasn't scared about the pain, just shocked at the fact that I broke it. Anyway, I was on one of those trolleys they push you around on, and I was put on the edge of a huge empty room next to the x-ray place. I was wheeled somewhere by my dad and a doctor, and the doctor left. I looked to my right, and there were 5 police officers surrounding this guy next to me who had some sort of broken leg or something. He was a criminal. Orange jumpsuit, badass look, just regular criminal vibes all around. He stared at me, eyes absolutely bulging. It was the creepiest shit I've ever seen. He looked like he wanted to murder me on the spot. He was wheeled out soon after and everything was fine, but damn, that was a hellish experience even looking at the guy. He also smelled like alcohol. Remember that distinctly. So I have a little cousin. I feel bad for him because his younger sister constantly hits him and scratches him and his parents do nothing. He has scars all over his arm. Anyway, one night there was a party with me, my friend, cousin, and my cousin with the little sister who was about 9 at the time. We're hanging out in the basement since it was a big open area with lots of space. His little sister was bothering him, so he chased her away. We thought nothing of it until they got a bit physical. The little sister was hitting him constantly until I think he just kind of broke. I saw him put his hands on her neck, so me and my cousin immediately broke them up. He felt really bad about it and was crying. He's about 11 now and is doing really well. I used to know a guy from school. He was on the autism spectrum, I think, had some form of mental condition. Last I heard, he had some minimum wage job, but a couple of years ago, I met him once on a bridge outside the local church, sitting there. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he came there to sit every day, hoping he would somehow find the courage to throw himself off. I still see him there from time to time. Clearly, he never did. A friend of mine, a girl, went to this guy's house to have dinner with him. He himself prepared the dinner, and it was pretty good, and they were both having a good time. Suddenly, when dinner was approaching its end, unfortunately, she shat herself. It is something that can surely happen, but she was indeed very, very embarrassed. But the guy behaved like a gentleman and told her that there was no problem and that she could use the bathroom to clean herself up while he put her dirty clothes in the washing machine. So she cleaned herself up and wore the clean clothes the guy gave her, and also thought that this guy was a polite and kind-hearted fella. Then she exited the bathroom. She found the guy standing in the living room, rubbing himself with her shit-stained clothes. He had put laxatives in her food. He planned it. TLDR. A guy put laxative in the food of a girl he invited to dinner so she would shit herself and so he could rub himself with the shit-stained clothes. The creepiest was when I saw a killer in 2008, but that's before he committed the crime in 2009. I remember seeing this guy sitting in the student library. He was a university student, just like I was at the time. I could feel his evil energy near me, and it made me look up suddenly, and then I saw him in the corner. He was just sitting on a chair, staring at nothing in particular. He had these strange, dark eyes, and he was wearing a beanie with pieces greasy hair sticking out from under it. I remember thinking he would be handsome if he took the stupid beanie off. I felt a sense of dread just being near him. I could sense that he was dangerous. The victim felt the same way apparently. She was also a student at the campus, but a few years younger than him. He was studying business or something like that. Anyway, the victim told her friends he was weird and didn't want to talk to him. I think she too got a similar feeling of dread from being near him, especially his eyes looked cruel. I mean, he wasn't ugly, exactly, but he had a cruel face. Anyway, he was arrested shortly after the murder and given a 30-year prison sentence. He confessed as well. He admitted fully he did it. So basically, one night, me and a couple of friends were walking through a forest or woods. We went two ways as we wanted to go to different places. Some were drunk and some weren't. After about an hour, we all met back up. One friend from the group, Alfie, tells us he saw a young girl sitting on a tree in a yellow dress and covered in blood. Another friend from the other group, Billy, says he saw the same thing, so us being the stupid people we were, walked back into the woods to find this little girl sitting there on a rock looking at a tree. Alfie shouts at her to ask if she's okay and she runs away. Everyone split into groups of two and ran to find her. Me and Billy sat down after walking for 10 minutes. The girl was sitting on a log in the woods and behind was a bottle of Coors Light. Billy threw the bottle, aiming past her, but accidentally hit her. The bottle went right through her and we freaked. The group heard the bottle smashed along with a married couple walking through the woods. We pointed at the girl to the couple, but they couldn't see anything. I'm not sure what happened that night, but it's always been in the back of my mind. Me going the first time into a lost place. I was in some other lost places before, but the first time in that location, and having deja vu, like full-on knowing where every room and staircase is, and me knowing that one of the rooms is furnished before stepping foot inside the room and before opening the room. A couple of weeks ago, me and my little brother were in a yard and this car just slowly passed the property. I was watching him while my mom was in the garden and I was throwing axes and shooting slingshots. I see the car creep by. We're both young. Brother is 4, I'm 13, so prime targets for the scumbags. And I'm male as well, so it's not like the person was staring at my big old boobies. But as I watched them go by, I told my brother to stay away from the road and stay near me or mom, whilst I simultaneously drew my slingshot. Didn't need to fire, thankfully, but I would have been more than happy to shatter a car window of a predator with my trusty wrist rocket. I told my mom to keep an eye out, told my little brother to help mom garden as I was going inside, and he didn't want to. Didn't get the plate number or car model, and the windows were blacked out, so I couldn't report anything to authorities. Shame. Years ago, I was at a department store with my mother, my baby sister, and my mother's close friend along with her child. My mother was shopping like 5 meters away, and her friend was watching my baby sister sitting on the cart with a pacifier in her mouth. My sister accidentally dropped the pacifier and it landed on the floor. My mother's friend noticed my mom was not looking, picked up the pacifier and sucked it and put it back in my sister's mouth. I was in a hotel room and I heard unsettling noises coming from the closet. I tried to open it, but it was locked. Later that night, I wake up at 3 to 4 a.m. to see the closet with the doors wide open and my hotel room door knocked on. I go into the hallway, but there's nobody there. I go back to my room to see black goo all over my bed and leaking out of the closet. I call the hotel manager and he responds, "Call the police." As he leaves, I see this man in my room with a machete and I get the fuck out of there. The goo turned out to be paint, and the dude was trying to murder me and take my stuff. He had been on drugs and had been hiding in that closet for the past week and was looking for a victim to rob and kill. He was previously wanted for offering drugs to minors, possible cannibalism, and for hiding his wife's body in his closet in 2009. He was a previous staff member for the hotel until he was fired for sexual harassment towards a customer. Now I know not to go to hotels in a crime-filled city. What is the most gruesome thing you have ever seen? Not safe for work. An infant got ejected from a car through the windscreen onto a concrete road. My dad was taking me home from dance class on a dark, rainy night. The woman driving in front of us was going too fast round the roundabout. She swerved off the road into a tree. She had her seatbelt on, but her infant was in the car seat in the front passenger side facing forward, and he wasn't actually strapped in. She got out and was screaming and crying, "I killed my baby!" My dad stopped to help and to call emergency services. We had to wait there for them to show up. When they did, they put a blanket covering the baby's body. Honestly, it was horrendous. I still remember seeing his body hit the floor. My uncle is a retired fireman, and one time he told me he had been on call due to a person seen on the train tracks at night. When they found the person, he had been sliced in half by the train, but what freaked my uncle out was that when he walked up to him, the guy reached out to him because he was still alive. The guy died shortly after. I was the first person on a scene of a fatal car crash. An elderly couple got T-boned right in the driver's door when they pulled out in front of a pickup. I went to the driver's side first, but the old man was clearly dead. I ran around to the passenger side, and the lady was moaning horribly and moving her arms around in a weird way. Found out later is baked posturing and is caused by significant brain trauma. She also had some milky stuff oozing out of her ear. Everything happened so fast, it seemed like the police showed up in an instant, but I'm sure it was like 10 or 15 minutes. As soon as they showed up, I just left. Found out later they both died. They were just in town visiting their daughter. It was pretty sad. The guy in the pickup walked away from the accident, and it wasn't his fault. They pulled out right in front of him. So I do TikTok moderation. We constantly watch the most horrible things, but the first time I had to watch a video of child pornography, I vomited and cried for a good while. I'm still pretty traumatized, but unfortunately it was only the first time. We get that kind of content on a regular basis. There's also plenty of suicide and murder as well as animal torture. Did a volunteer mine rescue gig where the school you up to be a certified EMT. During my in-town ride on a real ambulance, we went on a wild goose chase looking for a suicidal girl. Long story short, we found her up an old dirt road where she had sucked up on a shotgun, and basically the only thing left was the top of her brainstem. The entire Durango was painted in brain matter. I'll never forget the smell. The other paramedics laughed and took pictures of her exploded skull. I wasn't that interested in being an EMT after that. A large chunk of a coworker's scalp after her hair had gotten caught in a piece of machinery. I was 17, apprenticing to be a goldsmith at a workshop where we made jewelry from a beautiful local stone that was cut and polished in-house. One of the ladies forgot to tie up her very long hair. It got caught in the axle of one of the big polishing wheels, pulled out a hand-sized chunk of scalp, got tangled in the cable from a lamp, and just kept on whipping round and round while the woman was screaming on the floor and everybody else was frozen in shock. Somehow, I was the one that managed to crawl along the floor, avoid the churning mess, and turn off the machine. It was nothing compared to what my colleague went through, but still freaking horrible. ETA. Wow, that brought back memories. So much horrible shit happened during those 2 years. A coworker was jailed for raping his friend's baby daughter. Our goldsmith had his leg crushed when his friend drove drunk, and his heel was completely pulverized. Then there was the scalping, and finally our boss was assaulted and brutally stomped, and the assailant was identified by the very clear boot prints of the poor man's back. In the end, so many people spent so many months in hospital, completely insane. Volunteer EMT. Older lady who lived alone had a stroke and laid on the floor alive for a number of days. Her kids had welfare check on her, and we were called when cops arrived. The arm she laid on was flattened like a pancake and essentially dead. She had soiled herself numerous times and laid in it. When we got her off the ground, part of her leg was still left on the floor due to what I can only guess is the acidity from the urine and feces. She was put on hospice and died about a week later. It still haunts me from time to time. It pops into my head at random moments. Former crime scene cleaner. Where do I even begin? Not the most gruesome, but the one job that will always stay with me was a decomp. 8 weeks in a bathtub during the peak of summer with no AC in the apartment unit. Basically it was soup by that point. With so many bugs we used a shovel. The most gruesome jobs were always very unfortunate. Some movies, though, I'd consider to be pretty accurate representation of what I saw. When I was a kid, one day at a water park, I was next in line for one of those nearly vertical 100-plus foot slides, the kind where you lay back and cross your arms and gain enough speed to skip across the water like a rock at the bottom. A drunk guy shoved me aside and ran past me. He jumped, grabbed the bar above the slide, and swung himself forward, far out and away from the face of the slide. I watched as he landed on the rocks below and became more puddle than person, gore everywhere. That haunted me for a while. I was doing about 40 miles per hour in my little Nissan pickup when a guy on a bicycle rode right out in front of me. I hit him at the same time I hit my brakes, so he got the full force of that collision. I looked him dead in the eyes as his face smashed into the windshield right above the steering wheel. As I was sliding to a stop, he was about 10 feet to the left of me, doing high-speed cartwheels in the median. My friend jumped out of the passenger seat to help. A few other cars had also pulled over. As I got out of my truck to assess what just happened, I got a good look at the guy I hit. He was lying on his back in the dirt, wearing only jean shorts. He was going through heavy, convulsive breathing. His face was smashed in, and blood was pouring out of his mouth, nose, and I think his ears as well. I hit him on his left side, so all of his ribs on that side looked pretty crushed in. His left leg was broken roughly at the center of his femur. The lower half of his leg was upside down and pointing up toward his head. Looking at his right leg was like looking at an exploded view of all the muscles and bones from the knee to the ankle. Everything was just opened and exposed and bleeding profusely. I got back into my truck to move it out of traffic. I pulled into a parking lot across the street and parked it. I got out to look at the damage to my truck, and I saw a 1-inch chunk of fresh, bloody meat stuck to the hood. A few years ago, I was walking in the downtown area with my family back to our car when I saw a dude a block down the street run faster than I've ever seen a man run in my life. I jokingly said, "Whoa, he's got somewhere to be," and looked where he was running from. He slit a man's throat on the corner of a street, and a few people were holding a shirt up to the man's neck to keep him alive while waiting for help to arrive. Next thing I knew, 4 cop cars were going down the direction he had gone down. I feel like I should mention this was in broad daylight on a busy street in front of dozens of people. I don't know if the guy owed money or if he was on something, but it was a stupid move on all parts. Don't know if the guy survived. I hope so. A coworker's head was crushed by a 10,000-pound coil of steel. His head was pinned between the coil and the machine he ran. I heard the sound of the coil hitting, turned to look, and saw the blood running down his arm. My first thought was he hurt his arm, then I realized what happened. After 40 years, I still have bad dreams. Probably when me and my friends were still at school, we were walking across some grass one time going home and smelled something bad, and my friend spotted a hedgehog in front of us moving about slightly. There were flies around, but since it was moving and the smell wasn't horrific, we assumed it was super sick or dying. My friend got closer and got a stick to very gently poke it, not wanting to touch it straight off with his hand as we wanted to help, but we were not sure what was up with it, and he didn't want to get a bite or anything. Basically, the moment he touched it, we found out it was dead. The skin just opened like jelly and maggots spilled out everywhere with rotting hedgehog guts, and my lord, the smell. Turned out the moving was the maggots under the skin. The lot of us threw up. Was driving through the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, coming from a town going back to our Airbnb that's in a nearby village. In between there's a few other villages and mostly sand and rock and treacherous turns. My wife is driving. I'm in the back seat with my 2-year-old, and we're coming down a winding descent that ends with a tight turn over a stone bridge that's about 15 to 20 feet high, over jagged rocks as it's winter at the time and the riverbeds are all dry. The bridge is built out of big stones cut into big bricks, and the top layer of stone acts as a barrier between the road and plunging into the riverbed below, and the stone comes up from the road. By about 1.5 feet across the bridge is a little village of 10 or so huts built into a hill. In front of our car is a truck and a white van that looks like a box. Think cargo van, but sized down for normal use. And in front of that van, making the turn and going over the bridge, are 2 kids on bikes, looking no older than 8 years old. The van goes to overtake the kids on bikes who are hugging the side of the bridge, and we're still coming down the hill, so from where I'm sitting, I have an elevated view for what happens. The kid in the front, the younger looking of the two, begins to wobble, and his bike veers into the side of the van, and he bounces off the other way, his bike tire hitting the stone edge, and he flips over his handlebars, does a full front flip, and lands face down on the rocks below. By the time we rounded the curve and went over the bridge, the rocks were stained red, and people from the village across the bridge were already running down to the bridge, trying to make it down to the kid in the riverbed. The image of that kid's final moments are forever etched in my brain for its brutality, but so are the faces of those who ran down. It was the most gruesome and traumatic experience I've ever witnessed firsthand. I work in an ER. Had a self-inflicted gunshot wound come in at the start of the shift. When we transferred the man from the EMS stretcher to our stretcher, it was an absolute bloodbath. Brain matter everywhere, on the floor, on the stretcher, on my shoes. He still had a heartbeat, so we worked on him for a good hour or two before it was called. His brain was so edematous that it was pushing out the entry and exit wounds in his head. Blood pooled all over the floor. We tracked it through the room on our shoes. In the chaos, someone had taken trauma shears to his down jacket to strip him. Big no-no. So there were down feathers stuck everywhere there was blood. Felt bad for the crew that had to clean up after, but the ER keeps moving. My dad, blackout wasted drunk, complaining loudly of his tooth hurting, and my mom, sober, telling him to deal with it. He took this as go to the shop and grab the pliers and proceeded back into the shop with the pliers in his right hand and a bottle of spiritus in his left. He drank some of the spiritus, no chaser, and proceeded to rip his bad tooth out with the pliers. Right after, he exclaimed, "That's how you get her done," with blood pouring out of his mouth. He went to the hospital and they put stitches in his mouth and cut out the rest of the tooth that broke off. When I was 10 or 11, my family was in a conversion van driving to Colorado for a family trip. We hit some one-lane traffic on the way across the interstate behind a semi on the side of the road. Too late, my folks realized it was a gruesome accident. We drove past in slow motion as a larger guy was laying on the ground opened up like a book. From what we later heard, he was sideswiped while getting out of his semi when it broke down. He must have had a sizable beer belly, and it just sheared him open. Yep, that's the one that sticks in my memory pretty vividly 20 plus years later. When I was 12 or so, we had this jackass down the street that would spend all his money on motorcycles, cars, lights under said cars, and motorcycles, late 90s, early 2000s. One day, we're in my dad's car checking the mail at the community mailbox thing, and said motorcycle dude is going through the neighborhood doing a wheelie. Well, our neighborhood was super ghetto, and so were our roads, cracks, potholes, uneven crappy asphalt repairs. Dude hit a pothole and rears all the way back. Well, I guess his hand slipped back on the accelerator and he rockets back super fast. He wasn't wearing a helmet. We watched that dude's top half of his back, of his skull, come off from the high-speed, coarse asphalt, and his brain was literally out of his head. One of our other neighbors was there and didn't really know what to do, so he started trying to scoop dude's brain back in his head while my dad sped home to call the ambulance. Surprisingly, dude survived, at least for a little while, but was a total vegetable. Fucked me up as a kid. When I was like 14, I was on Facebook and I randomly happened to stumble upon a video sent by the boys. It was a room setting, so I thought it was in for a treat and unzipped. Right as I started stroking, I realized something was wrong. The woman started to beg for her two captors to let her go. Then I noticed they were wearing the exact same clothing. Later found out those were cult members, and they had sacrificed more than 3 victims at that point. Then, one of the two men started hitting on her stomach with a sharp stick until blood started to come out. I should have stopped then, but for some reason I watched till the end. The two men started to torture her, and at last one of them cut off her whole head in one hit. Then, they held the beheaded head in front of the camera. It was definitely real. That was traumatizing. From then on, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face and heard those pleas for help for like a year after that incident. Not to say that killed my boner real quick. This took place during my time as an EMT student back in 2019. Arrived on scene to do a wellness check on a local apartment resident. The neighbors claimed that they hadn't seen nor heard from their neighbor for the past few weeks. My God, you could smell the stench halfway up the stairs to the apartment. We knocked on the door, announced that we were with EMS and that we were there to help. No answer. Law enforcement arrived and we proceeded inside. The apartment was well kept but empty, with a bunch of cats and a dog roaming around. As I neared the sofa in the main room, the stench got stronger. I started breathing through my mouth. I walked around the corner of the sofa and noticed that a decaying body was just 3 inches from my boot. It scared the crap out of me, but I held my composure. I had to. Guy must have been dead for at least 3 weeks already, but he had the appearance of a decaying copper statue, the color of Lady Liberty. His hair looked like rotting dead grass. The smell of rotting flesh and death is strong, heavy, and unforgettable. It was the most gruesome thing that I've ever seen. I still have dreams because of it sometimes.